OTB AM.
With Gillette, proud supporters of Movember. Gentlemen, let's move.
7:30 on this Monday morning. You're welcome along to OTB AM. Owen and Johnny Ward with you right the way through until 10 o'clock this morning. And we've got a big old weekend of Premier League to get stuck into. We're going to be talking as well about Shamrock Rovers being crowned League of Ireland champions for the second consecutive season. We will do our very best this morning to round up the madness of the club GAA action from across the weekend. And we'll also be talking about the Women's FA Cup semi-finals and the All Blacks rolling up to the Northern Hemisphere and still being pretty good at rugby. So a busy all morning coming up between now and 10 o'clock. You can get in touch with us by tweeting us at Off The Ball. Johnny, how are you getting on?
Yeah, I'm good. Very windy morning coming in here. Kind of focused the mind on this climate summit going on in Glasgow. I think, I don't know, and maybe in sport we don't kind of talk about it enough. We think we just get on with sport now. I know, so I think Bohemians might have a climate officer. Both seem to have an officer for pretty much everything. But yeah, I think I know we talk about sport when we come in here. But you know, I was watching a little video on the BBC last week where there's a guy in Baghdad who he directs traffic, and he regularly directs traffic in 50-degree heat. And his son loves to play football. His son can only play football at night because it's too hot during the day. So when he plays at night, it's only 40 degrees. You know, and it was just there's another piece on Kuwait that it's becoming borderline uninhabitable, and parts of the Middle East like that are heating up more than anywhere else. And obviously we're bound for Qatar for the World Cup. But I hope today focuses the minds of people even coming in here this morning, like another yellow warning from Met Éireann for various parts of the country for terrible wind and kind of stormy conditions. So I know we don't talk about it much in sport, and it's rarely on the agenda. And in Ireland, we don't have many games called off for various things, but there's an awful lot of stuff coming down the tracks, I suppose, that we should be conscious of and should be more in the debate than is maybe.
David Pocock was kind of front and centre over the last couple of weeks, actually. He's playing against the clock. It's that new climate change documentary that he's involved in, and he's just kind of making the point that sports people should be front and centre and using their profile a little bit more. I think Blind Boy made a similar point recently as well, that it's like sports people should be using their profile to kind of change the minds of people on their behaviours when it comes to climate change. So maybe it legitimately is. Like, it is quite a tangent you brought us down here first thing in the morning, Johnny, I will say, but it is an interesting one when it comes to what sports people can do.
Well, you asked me how I was.
Yeah, no, and I'm thankful for this. I'm thankful for this tangent.
If you're not thinking about the climate like several times a day, you're probably not doing it right, you know. And it's because it's like if you want to look at the property market and buy a gaff in Sandymount but not think of the fact that it might be underwater in 30 years, I mean, there's something wrong. And we're talking about a tiny portion of the history of man who've caused this, and we're among them, you know, a tiny portion. So we kind of probably do need to get it right. And, you know, the stance against the knee, and, you know, we've had the pandemic. There are lots of things, very admirable things going on in sport, but it's good. It's a fair point. We could, you know, there could be more ambassadors for what is ultimately the only thing that matters. You know, you worry about, like, if you're into politics, maybe you want a left-wing government, you want a United Ireland, you want this, you want that, but ultimately we want our children and our children's children to be able to live on the planet. And go to games in Kerry, you know, and the championship and so on.
I take it that you're on the or you're looking to get your limbs onto the property ladder right now. I'm going to call Sandymount.
Well, on account of the prevailing climate crisis, I'm thinking Dalkey, because it's up on such a height, like, so that'd do me. Coola probably. Yeah.
It might do your kids, but not your grandkids. It'll be underwater by that.
Dalkey's. Well, I'd go up like kind of what's that road up by Vico there. So yeah, it'd be grand, and go to the Coola games and so on. Lovely little village. I don't know if you've frequented it much.
I've been there a couple of times, once or twice. Wouldn't frequent it. Of course, you've kind of said on the show multiple times that this is basically your neighbourhood now. Natural
Dalkey.
Yeah.
Well, clearly it isn't. Like,
I mean, you know more than most people.
I
on
live
the show.
in Dublin 8.
I assume then that the natural progression of this is that you have shelled out €135 on a ticket for the All Blacks game in a couple of weeks.
No, I haven't, and I haven't gotten a ticket for the Portugal game, which is a cause of concern.
Sure, you're not a football man anymore. It's, as long as you get your rugby union ticket.
Yeah, it's at least, like, I don't know, that sold out obviously, but I think you had a small window of opportunity, had you there, to get a ticket for that?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Not sure.
The Portugal game is the one I'm still hoping against hope that I can nab a ticket somewhere, because you can't even, do you know the way, like, when one of the perks of our job is you can rock up as as media, even though you're clearly not working at the game. That doesn't wash it out.
We never do that, Johnny. Remember?
Certainly, it's like at race meetings, journalists never pay in. For example, they have a media pass, so they don't have to pay in. They have a pass as part of the media, and I'm sure it's common in. As a journalist that you'll rock up, but I think the FAI, I think the Aviva Stadium, there just are nowhere near enough seats for even people who want to do that. So obviously I'll be working at the game.
So what is on your mind this Monday morning is the question we're going to ask you all morning. If it is climate change, if it is what sports people can be doing for it, please tweet Johnny Ward, please tweet me, get in touch with the show.
You did the reason I said that was because when I opened the door this morning, like, it was ridiculously windy. So like even though like we've had a good year of weather in Ireland, like we're having so many extremities as well that like it's at our doorstep as well. It's not like it's we can worry about it in other countries. So that's why it came into my head, I guess. And the taxi driver who brought me in was basically talking about the very same thing.
Right.
So there
I
we go.
was going to ask you if you dressed up as anything for Halloween, but this is far more interesting.
No, nobody called at the door either.
Same.
Yeah, nothing.
Delighted with that.
Yeah.
We just turn off the lights and pretend no one's home. Oh, we just got cars parked outside for no reason and everybody's just out at the pub.
Sounds quite dark, actually.
It does,
antisocial. I've spent a few Sundays like that. But also the Go United playoffs coming up Wednesday, so big time to be a Go United fan. Or the race to get to the Premier Division, all the playoffs now begin on Wednesday, so that's pretty exciting. Yeah,
big all week, and we're going to get stuck into some of those League of Ireland talking points as well in our performance rankings coming your way in just a moment. OTB AM is brought to you by Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. As you can see, the performance rankings coming up in just a moment, and then we're going to have Mark Lawrenson with us at 8:10 to review the weekend's Premier League action. The sports page is the sports news with Cathal Mullaney as well a little bit later on, and then Kathleen McNamee will be with us to look back on yesterday's FA Cup semi-finals in the women's game across the water. We'll also be looking ahead to Stephen Kenny's Ireland squad, which is going to be announced on Thursday. Alan Quinlan will be with us at 9:10 to talk about the All Blacks at the weekend, to talk a little bit about Eddie Jones and his comments in response to that London Times article last night, and the Sunday papers coming your way then at 9:30. But before all that, it is time for the Gillette performance rankings, and I should say that every morning on OTB AM we give you the chance to win a Gillette starter pack, and all you got to do to enter is get in touch with your suggestions. Time for the performance rankings.
You know, that wasn't an All-Ireland winning performance.
Probably should have won the game based on their second half performance.
Is it a step too far to say it was the performance so far of the World Cup? Maybe not.
OTB AM's performance rankings with Gillette.
I'm scratching my head. That performances was just lacked that intensity.
Alright, get in touch with your suggestions this morning. You can tweet us at Off The Ball. You can leave a comment on the YouTube stream if that's where you're getting us. Every Monday morning we go through the good, the bad and the grand from the weekend's sport. So in the red this morning, first thing, we've got Tottenham Hotspur and we've got Norwich. We may start with Spurs here. Johnny, I think the perfect springboard for Manchester United to just rebound from an awful run of form, and I think they were even worse than a lot of people expected. You get to the point now where everybody's talking about feeling sorry for Nuno Espirito Santo. It is a very bad situation when everybody feels sorry for your manager.
Yes, like, and in a situation like this, you know, do you look at the players or do you look at the manager? Because obviously the players aren't playing for the manager, Harry Kane in particular. But he didn't come in with a bad pedigree. Like, he'd done such a good job of Wolves. It's hard to figure out how they're that bad. And it's like the Manchester United. Like, Manchester United have become. It's almost like they're just in the entertainment industry now, where like every single day I'm in here, we seem to be on about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Manchester United. This must be going on for about 3 or 4 years, but it's really reached peak entertainment in the last few weeks. And to follow that performance against a Liverpool team who didn't look great at all against Brighton, it has to be said, which raises some other questions. Like the perfect team for Manchester United to play, and you're just wondering how long he'll have in the job. But you know, look at the professionalism of some of the players like Harry Kane and that. I mean,
well, what's Harry Kane's motive at the moment, do you think? Because
does he even have one?
Like, that's what I would question. He looks so disinterested to the point where he surely knows he is sabotaging any chance of a future move. The narrative around Harry Kane now seems to be that City were right not to pay the money for him. So if the longer this continues, the less chance there is of a club like Manchester City coming up with a fee for him next summer. Like, at the start of the season, you might have thought to yourself, well, come January, if there's enough money on the table, they might sell him. But nobody's going to want to buy this guy in January. No, like, if City, and they've showed again on Saturday that they still need a number 9, Like, are they going back for Kane again, even if they get 20, 25 million knocked off the fee? I'm not sure they are.
It does seem anomalous in terms of his career, and I've seen Gary Neville speak about his professionalism and all that. But like, I haven't seen Spurs week to week this season, but this doesn't seem to be an outlier in terms of his recent performances. And I do like. I think a lot of Roy Keane's analysis is very simplistic and kind of like, he talks about simple things like values and so on and so forth. But he, on issues like this, he's 100% right. Like, you go out and perform, whether you like the manager or not. Give it, like, you can moan away and you can be disgruntled, but perform for 90 minutes. At least put in an effort. I can never really get my head around that. That as much as he's obviously lost the dressing room, you're playing for your fans here as well. Manchester United, in fairness, they produce a performance. If you're paid that amount of money, you're essentially playing for the club, you're playing for the fans, and put in a shift, register a shot on target anyway. I mean, so I don't know, it's a black mark against him, and it's a good point to make that there's a bit of an asterisk there in the future in terms of people want to sign him, because this can't go on any longer, and you feel sorry for Nuno, obviously.
Yeah, Brian's been in touch to say, I know we regularly lambast players for lack of effort, and it can be low-hanging fruit, but Harry Kane was absolutely disgraceful on Saturday. And I don't think you'll find too many people who will disagree with that point of view at all. Patrick, meanwhile, says Johnny's absolutely right. I'm getting ready for another bushfire season here in Perth. It's every year we run the gauntlet of bushfire, which is directly linked to climate change. And then on another note, he says, great to see Ole winning. This is
that at least he's conscious of. That's Brian, is it?
It's the Patrick.
Patrick. At least Patrick is. I mean, he's conscious of ultimately what matters in life, namely sport, and he's also vaguely conscious of the climate because he lives in Australia, which has been at the centre of a hell of a lot of crap over the last few years in terms of the climate.
And it is interesting. The
sport is the great triviality, like
it is,
but it's never been more so than right now, because like we spend hours and hours and hours debating Ole's contract when the world is burning.
Absolutely.
I mean, and we will do it for the next 2 hours.
I think cognitive dissonance is the very definition of us debating Ole in this sort of context at this moment. When you talk about Manchester United, it's an interesting point you make. It is like the entertainment industry defined by United, that they are by and large the biggest story in town, even if they were winning every single game. But because of the boom-bust cycle under Solskjaer, it's become even more compelling, the conversation around Manchester United. And there was almost this concerted effort, I felt, in the Sky studio on Saturday night, where Gary Neville and Roy Keane just couldn't smile. They couldn't say anything positive. They kind of feel really aware of the criticism that they've been under over, not throwing their buddy under the bus. And I felt that despite getting a big win, I think, away from home against a decent team, that they were just a little bit reluctant to say, this was a really good result for Manchester United. Because let's face it, it buys Ole time. It does change the narrative, even just for 48 hours.
Well, so Dion Fanning had an article in The Currency Saturday about the nostalgic element to all of this, and it was so true, because you're talking about Roy Keane and Gary Neville. So Roy Keane, what's he, 50 now? I think he turned 50 when the two of them did the video or whatever. So there are obviously young players playing today who've no recollection of Roy Keane really at all, or certainly don't remember him playing at his pomp. So when you see like the shadow of Ferguson over the proceedings, how he's kind of involved himself wittingly or unwittingly in the narrative, Solskjaer being there as that nostalgia that brings you back to Munich, brings you back to like the glory days, and nostalgia was sort of the theme of the piece was like, nostalgia is a terrible thing really, because we need to move on here. But it was really funny that this is like a completely different, like going off on another tangent here. I was watching Leo Gale yesterday. I was like having this lazy day on the couch, and Johnny Pilkington was featured, and it was like, Leo Gale is just so good. Yeah. Like it's such a simple format. They've effectively interviewed the player in question, maybe 2 or 3 other people, and then they show footage from the games. So there isn't much more to it than that. Like, so they put a simple format. But he was like, so it was going back to 1995 when I just started secondary school, and then 1998. When I remember I was like in 3rd or 4th year, but they were playing songs from that era, which like completely brought me back. I remember like, I think I had my first girlfriend then. I remember that song by Blur was out at the time, and like this nostalgia just, and it's particularly on a Sunday, completely overtook me yesterday. And so much of the Man United narrative is a nostalgia for the old time when the Premier League was great. I was younger, I hated Man United, but they were, Roy Keane and Alex Ferguson. It was impossible, and it was taken over it was sweeping Ireland at the time. I remember as a kid, like everyone used to go to the pub to watch Sky and see Man United like become the dominant force, Eric Cantona and all that. And I think an awful lot of the Man United stuff now is pining for those days, like, and that's why Solskjaer to some extent is in the job, because there's a hell of a lot of nostalgia going on there. And like when you have Keane and Gary Neville, they're talking about like their buddy and aware that they're now part of the narrative as well. It's just like, well, what year are we in here? Like, and then they play a combined strike force of 70 as well, just to add to that.
I was going to say, I mean,
Ronaldo goes way back to that time as well.
That's exactly.
Obviously, that's part of the lure of that transfer. Even though the Ronaldo question is so interesting, because he's clearly not doing a bad job himself in terms of his own capabilities, but it's what it does to the rest of the team. And
I think Roy Keane, I mean, he may be lauded as somebody who just creates controversy without giving you any sort of insight, but I thought he made a really good point on Saturday that if you're not very good at pressing, just sit in, and a team with Ronaldo probably should be doing that a little bit more, and it was lunacy to try that against Liverpool the previous week. And when you do sit in, and when you do find a little bit of space in behind the opposition defence, Ronaldo can absolutely devastate you, and it's not a nostalgia signing when you see Ronaldo in that sort of form on Saturday.
How bad were Spurs though? Do you know? Like,
of course, that is.
If you genuinely, as a top level coach now, if you're presented with Cavani and Ronaldo as your front two, like and that's what you're set up against, with Matic in midfield, I mean, you shouldn't be that worried. Like, this is a high pressure, high intensity. The Premier League is an incredibly fast game played at its best. If Man City play Liverpool particularly, so I don't know. Like, is it more of a reflection on how pathetic Spurs were? But it's just typical Man United that they just swung this almost like extremes of performance or extremes of narrative that Ole has brought them back. But like, obviously the problems remain, deep problems, and we may talk about like some of the clubs coming up, but there's an interesting battle there for sort of fourth place.
Yeah.
And I don't think at the moment Manchester United, I wouldn't fancy them to finish in the top four the way they've looked. I think West Ham obviously are doing very well, but Arsenal are clicking now, and Man United just have probably too many problems there, and I'm not sure they're all Solskjaer related, but that'll be an interesting narrative of the season ahead.
Well, hopefully, because it definitely felt for the first couple of games of the season when Ronaldo scored in his debut, for example, that the top four was boxed off and that nobody else was getting in there. We need Manchester United to be flaky for this thing to be alive, because now Liverpool and Manchester City both deservedly dropping points on Saturday, and I do think that top three will probably pull away as the season goes on. But if Manchester United constantly go boom bust, then West Ham, Arsenal, Spurs, potentially Leicester, and then maybe Brighton and Everton come into this conversation about who's going to get the fourth spot, and that just leads to a really interesting sort of narrative. But who is it for you at the moment if you had to pick as to who's going to come forth?
Possibly Arsenal, actually. Just I wouldn't like, I predict Manchester United to have a better season at the start than they are maybe before Ronaldo signed. And I thought, like, in fairness, last year I thought defensively they were quite solid, and Solskjaer might be considered a bit conservative with the way he was playing Fred and McTominay. But like, I think that they're far better off playing conservative and using the pace that they have on the break than they are like playing gung ho like they did against Atlanta and Liverpool. Now the Pogba situation is another elephant in the room. Like, I don't know what happens there. And I think there were too many signs. I mean, Klopp spoke about the body language against Brighton. What about the body language of Man United in the second half? And, Ronaldo should have been sent off. Pogba was sent off. So those problems haven't gone away, even though they beat an insipid Spurs. So I wouldn't really trust Man United at this stage, even though Ole might be gone. It's hard to know, like, but I wouldn't. Maybe Arsenal, but West Ham probably are coming into the picture a bit. Like, they're not a million miles off.
No, the Thursday nights obviously are going to be a bit of a factor for a lot of those clubs going for fourth, and it's probably a big plus in the column for Arsenal at the moment that they don't have to play on Thursday nights, because that screwed them up a little bit over the last little while, I think it's fair to say. But it's going to be a massive week, obviously. Manchester United against Manchester City. It's the lunchtime kickoff this Saturday. We'll have plenty of build up to it across the week, because I think everybody kind of expects this to be maybe a back down to reality once again for United, but maybe not. Solskjaer has beaten Manchester City in his career with United in the not too distant past, so stranger things have definitely happened. The other thing we just wanted to touch on in the bad before we move on to the grand this morning is one of the other Premier League storylines, and we're keen to point out here that it's Norwich that are in the red, because Norwich are bad and they will get relegated. It would be astonishing if they didn't get relegated. They could have got something out of the game. Yesterday was a crazy 4 minutes or whatever it was when the 3 goals were scored. We had Andrew Omobamidele making a rare start for Norwich and his first senior goal for the club. He is very much not in the red this morning. Omobamidele could be in the green. He hadn't scored before half time. Jamie Redknapp says the left back, Obafemi, I think he called him, is struggling out there. In fairness, he's marking Rafinha, who's a starter for Brazil right now, Leeds' best player, and he actually wasn't doing that badly against him.
Conflated him with a struggling striker that isn't actually getting into the Ireland setup.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And that was the person that Redknapp decided to pick out at half time. But second half, gets up for a corner, back of the net, lovely header, and this really passionate celebration. I mean, we were obviously watching this kid closer than everybody else, and of course, everybody at that level desperately cares about everything they do, but it just seems everything matters so much to this kid, and he realises how important that goal was for him yesterday, that people are talking about him. And yes, they get beaten, and maybe he could be up for criticism for Rafinha's goal, but I think that'll be harsh. But I think by and large he comes out of it smelling like roses in comparison to a lot of his teammates.
There's a passionate celebration, and it could be a Pipo Inzaghi, but this was a passionate celebration in terms of exactly what you want your centre back to do. He was running back to the halfway line.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? He's like,
it's true.
I've scored, but like he's
Come
like come
back.
Of,
yeah.
Basically, like rallying his players around him to come back. And it's strange how we see the exact same thing. Like, you know, everyone's looking at the same moon, but we see it differently. And Jamie Redknapp is talking about Obafemi or whatever struggling against Rafinha. We're looking at like a player that we hold in such high regard in Ireland because of the performances that he's produced, and then, you know, the night against Serbia, I think he, maybe mainly Bazunu, but both he and Bazunu, two kids who've come up through the ranks in Ireland, lifted the nation, and he had that strike. It was like probably the loudest like Lansdowne Road has been for a while, apart from maybe the odd goal we've gotten. But that, like, the place went mad when Omobamidele went forward and had that strike against Serbia, and he has that in the locker. And what's interesting for Stephen Kenny, and we spoke to myself and Dan McDonald spoke to Stephen Rice in our podcast last week about the third Irish centre back becoming a kind of an extra player going forward at times, and it's something that I don't think opposition teams can. I think it's hard to set up against that but if you've 3 centre backs, one of them can have a bit of a licence, and he certainly has that in his locker. And Ireland have had like lots of chances where it's either Egan or mainly Duffy, even Obafemi
from open play,
open play, like. And I love to see that, because it's just something that you know, you don't see that often. Certainly not at an Irish level, but. Omobamidele to be playing like that, to be scoring at this level at the age that he is, it's just really, really encouraging. And hats off to David Sneyd, because he got an interview before the game with the Norwich manager whose name
Daniel
Farke rather. And Farke was really good in the interview. He's like, you know, Ida and Omobamidele, they're young kids, but he spoke at length about them, and it's clear he has a lot of regard for them, and it's just brilliant. We're absolutely overrun with players playing well at centre back at the moment, and Duffy didn't do badly against Liverpool either, what I saw of the game.
He got caught out a little bit for the first goal.
But like, in fairness, a brilliant cross or whatever, but like the centre back situation is very, very encouraging. Our goalkeeper situation is amazingly good, and if you've really good defence and a goalkeeper, Stephen Kenny's squad can work from there at the end of the week. So delighted for him.
So Thursday that squad gets announced. I'm sure we'll have plenty on that as the week goes on. Just to touch on a little bit more of that David Sneyd piece with Daniel Farke, because as you say, it was a really good insight into. But
just as a concept here, right? So I'd seen that this had about 12,000 hits on the 42 within an hour, and I was texting him. I was like, Jesus, fair play, David. Like, and presumably he goes, I just literally popped into the Zoom on the Norwich press conference, and there weren't many there. I was like, so you created a really good piece here that we're all interested in by basically doing nothing other than turn on your laptop, like.
Yeah, well, it's a bit hard.
He may have been in his jocks for all I know. Do you know what I mean? Like,
David Sneyd would say he's a hard-working journalist who he is a hard-working journalist, and this is an excellent piece. We need to get comment on whether or not he was in his jocks as he did this, but Farke did reveal.
I'm speculating now.
I mean, we're all for speculation here. Apparently, the Ida thing was just down to availability quite a lot, as is probably stating the obvious here. A lot last season, just not being available, not on the training pitch enough.
That's coronavirus,
and obviously COVID. and that's why he didn't get enough at championship level. Like, that's him suggesting that he hasn't played enough with the team at a lower division and therefore isn't getting enough minutes. The Ida question is very, very interesting, I find, because I think with Omar Bamidele, we've obviously seen, I guess, greater opportunities for him in the Premier League. There's no question about that. And with Ida, when you've got that goal scoring responsibility on you, you're just going to be judged in a far different way. Whereas with Ireland, it feels that Ida can go these next 20 games and not score a goal and still put in these phenomenal performances like he did that night against Portugal, because he just brings all these other players into proceedings. It feels with Norwich, if you get thrown in up front, you've got an expectancy to score goals immediately, or that's what the fans will expect of you.
So, well, one team has a horrific record in the last few years of its strikers scoring goals, and the other is Norwich, who are basically losing every week. So he's in a difficult position. Like where Troy Parrott has gone to MK Dons, he's playing in the third tier for a club that actually, by all accounts, plays lovely football and is 100% assisting his development. Same with Bazuna, who's gone in. I don't really care what level he's at, because he's going to be involved in a lot of goalkeeping. It's not easy for Ida, and for Ireland as well. That Serbia game I mentioned, he was so isolated up front, and I think it's been tough for him because a lot has kind of been asked of him at an early stage where he hasn't had much help. And ultimately for Omar Bamidele, it's probably a lot easier to be a centre back than a striker. Like, it's the hardest thing in football is scoring, is actually scoring goals, and that's been such a problem for us, obviously, since Robbie Keane. But we still have 3 or 4 players who have the potential to get there, and you're just hoping that they get club game time effectively.
And that's my point exactly, is that it is easier to make that mark straight away in both systems, I would argue, with Norwich and with Ireland. Like when he's talking about Ida, he says he has his instincts in and around the box, and to show this with consistency each and every training, working unbelievably hard, also each and every game when he gets the chance to impress. If it's 50 minutes, use your chance. If it's international games for Ireland, use your chance and score. It's interesting that Fark mentions Ireland as an opportunity for him to actually get minutes and get game time and show that he can use his chances, he says. Like, he's obviously an intelligent man. He'll know that there's more to his game than scoring goals. But my just one concern is that you've got 50 minutes to impress maybe in the Norwich shirt. Do you have to be getting on the score sheet to actually say that you've used your chance properly? Maybe not. Maybe it goes way beyond that. With regards to Omar Bamidele, and again, this is in the build-up to Sunday's game, he says, but Andrew, how much I love him and I'm excited by him, showed at the crunch time period last season. I had other options but trusted him. 18 years old at that time to be in the central position, to key position in defence. He fulfilled my wishes. Then he talks generally about these two guys. He says always it's important with the right timing, otherwise you can ruin their career really quickly. We have to look after them. I was never doubtful to put a young player on the spotlight once I think they are prepared. So there is certainly that level of concern within his own head.
Maybe he understands the position of David Sneyd as well in the Irish kind of journalistic hierarchy. He knows these words really, really matter. Because he probably wasn't expected to at a Norwich presser against Leeds to be thrown in these questions about Ida and Omar Bamidele. Yeah, and he's probably because he gave really detailed answers. He's kind of he was maybe playing to the Irish audience, but he's just. It's one of the sports and highlights of the year for me was either of his performances, either against Portugal or Serbia, that he was thrown in, and it was a lot of it was real old school last ditch defending stuff as well, which was great. And that image of him and Bazunu out on the pitch before the game, just the two of them alone in the Aviva Stadium. Imagine the careers that they could have. Yeah, it is, and it's genuinely exciting. I think I tweeted at the time during that Serbia game, I would have done anything to see that Omar Bamidele shot. I actually remember that tweet. I was getting nostalgic for it now. Yeah, absolutely anything. Yeah. So hopefully that time comes where he does net for Ireland, but he's off the mark for Norwich at least. We should bring this on actually to the Amber, Johnny. We've put the League of Ireland in the Amber this morning. Is this fair enough, Shamrock Rovers winning back to back? That you could look at this one of two ways. It hasn't exactly been an amazing League of Ireland season as a whole, and maybe Rovers going back to back without getting a massive challenge isn't exactly great news. Obviously Rovers will be in the green this morning. Yeah, I suppose I think the standard of the League of Ireland is pretty high at the moment, and I think that was borne out by the fact that Bohs and Dundalk performed so well in Europe, despite the fact that in the league, Dundalk are third or fourth last and Bohs are miles off the pace this season. So I think that's an indication that there's more strength and depth maybe than people think. St. Pat's didn't play in Europe, but they've been the clear second best team this season. But I suppose Stephen Bradley brought this up after the game, and in fairness, it's utterly staggering that a team that is running away with the league title hasn't had one player of the month. Now, I think it's probably the greatest certainty of all time that there'll be a Shamrock Rovers player in October, just because the journalists will want to hold face with Stephen Bradley, who said, like, I think his words were, the journalists who vote for this should have a long look at themselves. Like, and I'll have to be honest now, I'm very lazy. I don't really tend to vote which is the same as, like, if you don't vote in an election, well, your party responsible. You can't change things if you don't vote. So I don't really tend to vote in them.
That's a classic manager who's in a very good position, looking for some reason, some sort of siege mentality because things are going too well, you know.
Yeah, because in fairness, though, I think he does believe that Rovers are not getting the credit that they deserve. And I mentioned Europe. I think it's entirely down to the fact that people think they didn't perform in Europe. Now, it's not that they flopped in Europe, but I think they didn't, against Tallinn to get into Europa Conference group stages. I think they did they were probably favourites in that time. I don't think they really performed at their own level, and there were a lot of individual mistakes across the two legs. But if you watch them the other night, like, they've some beautiful footballers, like Dylan Watts, Danny Mandroiu. You know, some of the things they do. Mandroiu will probably be Player of the Month, I think, for October, and they were lovely to watch. I mean, they beat Finn Harps in the first sort of. The game was over after 5 minutes, effectively, but. You know, we had a big debate with Declan McBennett not that long ago about, like, you know, which was at times heated about RT's coverage of the League of Ireland, and one thing he said is we need more of a title race. And I was like, well, it's not really there's not much we can do about making it into a title race. But ultimately, the last 2 years, there hasn't been a title race, and it's a little bit of a damn squib that somebody isn't challenging Shamrock Rovers. And I think they haven't been actually at their best. I think there was another gear there if needed be, and they just didn't need to go for it. Conversely, the battle not to finish second last is really, really fascinating. The battle for Europe is fascinating. And Pats are playing Bows tonight. I think that'll be a really interesting game if you're in the Dublin area. The playoffs are starting the first division. But just, I suppose, we could have done with more of a title race. And that game on Friday night, like, Shamrock Rovers were getting coronated, but there was a sense of formality about it. And that's not Shamrock Rovers' fault. But with, I suppose, finally on that, Derry City, with the signings that they're making and the backing that they have from a very, very wealthy benefactor, and with the progress Pats are making, I would hope next season it'll be closer.
Right, well, that's a good note to lead the title race on. As you said, there's much more to be decided elsewhere in the League of Ireland Premier Division anyway over the next little while, and of course the First Division too. We're just going to skip on to the good from the weekend. Just briefly to mention the Club GAA, we're going to come back to this later on. We're going to talk about Kerry, we're going to talk about Tyrone, we're going to talk about the madness at the end of the Offaly football final and the Donegal hurling final, which had a first winner since the 1970s. We're going to come back to that at around 8:30, but a good weekend for Club GAA. We just want to mention here finally in the performance rankings this morning, Bryony Frost, Johnny, because this is a story that people might have missed over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, so Bryony Frost, and I want to be a small bit careful about how I word this because it's kind of an ongoing investigation in Britain. But Bryony Frost has been a poster girl for, I think she's been fantastic for racing in general. Now, there's very much a Marmite element to Bryony Frost. Like, she's over the top after races in terms of her excitement and how much she loves the buzz, and she's completely different to Rachel Blackmore in that sense, where Rachel Blackmore effectively gives fairly run-of-the-mill interviews and effectively just does her talking on the horse. Bryony is like, she'll give you an interview for 20 minutes about, like, jumping the second last or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So she's this really kind of effervescent rider, and she's very talented. But the horse that is associated with her most by a long stretch is Frodon, and he won the big race on Down Royal, which was her first, I think, her first ride in Ireland as a professional, actually. And it was an amazing race. We watched it, myself, Dan, and JD pretty much watched the race before we came on Saturday. Certainly Dan and I did anyway, and it was a great race to watch. Frodon looked like he was going to be swamped throughout, but he battled and battled and battled, and he won. And Bryony was obviously in great form after the race. But the context of this is an investigation into allegations that she made of bullying and harassment against Robbie Dunn. And there's now... What's interesting is that the jockeys, the Professional Jockeys Association, wants the matter closed because details of the investigation were leaked to the press, particularly I think the Sunday Times, which is interesting because Bryony is a member of the PGA, so like she is one of the rank, and I do wonder. Normally these things get, what happens in the weighing room stays in the weighing room, or we sort it out in the weighing room. If somebody has an issue with you, he or she will probably bring it up with you. Bryony's rides have gone down a lot in terms of this year, this time of year versus this time last year, and I'm speculating here, but I do wonder will this actually hurt her career, that she's seen to do something you shouldn't and bring up, these allegations to the authorities rather than deal with them internally. And I'm not taking any sides about this, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out when you have the Jockeys Association now say, actually, we want this closed because he's not going to get a fair trial. Sorry.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned there, the allegations have been made. There is an investigation ongoing, and that the full investigation, which is going to be carried out by the BHA, will hopefully go ahead despite a media leak over the next little while.
Yeah,
so
and
let's tie that up.
Briefly on it, like Robbie Dunn's alleged criticisms of her were to do with race riding techniques and like the suggestion that he was kind of wronged on a horse when she was riding another, and there were just things that happen within a race. These things happen all the time. But I think on the day the stewards decided that there wasn't any case to be made against Bryony Frost, that doesn't necessarily mean they make mistakes as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that she wasn't, riding a little bit carelessly or whatever. But I suppose the point is that they didn't deal with it internally, and she's probably... It's going to be tough for her now because she's now it's been leaked. It may never go to a proper fair hearing, and I think in the context of all of that, Saturday was a really timely victory for her because she's a very talented rider and to my mind a great ambassador for the sport.
Yeah, so that's Bryony Frost finishing up the performance rankings this morning, the Gillette performance rankings. She is in the green. As I say, we'll come back to Club GA a little bit later on this morning. So that is this morning's performance rankings.
OTB AM's performance rankings with Gillette.
Every Monday morning on OTB AM, we give you the chance to win a Gillette starter pack, and all you got to do to enter is get in touch with your suggestions. So we'll give a few shout outs later on for some of the best shouts in the performance rankings. We're going to be chatting to Mark Lawrenson next. We'll take a quick break.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Liverpool fans won't want to miss our latest Cadbury FC roadshow. We're going behind the scenes at Anfield with legendary striker Robbie Fowler.
We'll also be joined by Liverpool captain and Irish international Niamh Fahey and former Liverpool midfielder and physio Richie Partridge.
It's all with thanks to Cadbury FC and their club partnerships, granting you behind the scenes access at the Premier League's biggest clubs.
Coming soon to OTB Sports social channels.
Car insurance is boring, but you don't have to be. Get Set Go is the kind of car insurance you can sort in a few minutes online, then bounce on with your day. Are you ready for Quick Start Insurance? Get a quote now at getsetgo.ie. MCL Insurance Services Ireland Limited, trading as getsetgo.ie, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, proud supporters of Movember. Gentlemen, let's move.
You're welcome back. 7 minutes past 8 on this Monday morning, and we are turning our attention back to the Premier League action over the course of the last couple of days. Mark Lawrenson, good morning to you.
Morning.
Let's start with Saturday evening. Manchester United hammering Tottenham Hotspur. The crisis at Old Trafford is over.
Well, let's wait. Listen, they've got Man City next weekend, haven't they? And Atalanta midweek. But they were better. Obviously, they played with the kind of 3/5 at the back. There was far better commitment. They got kind of behind the ball as well when they lost it. I thought, obviously, playing two up front was good for them as well, with Ronaldo had a partner with him, and obviously that worked brilliantly for them. And you could just see there was a difference about them. But you know what? They shouldn't have had to be, should they? Because the players at this level, that's how they should be, week in, week out.
Do you like that shape, Mark? Do you think they should proceed with it over the next little while?
Well, they didn't concede, which is a bonus, so that will build the confidence up. Yeah, I don't see any great problem with that whatsoever. I think, the three central defenders understood the roles. Maguire can come out and play, which he tried to do. Varane came out and played a little bit as well into the midfield. So, yeah, I think for the players that they've got, that is probably the best system. The other thing as well is that they put the foot in on Saturday night. Both obviously Fred and McTominay, they put the foot in and they made some tackles. And also with that, when you get an extra man there in Fernandes in midfield, an extra body, it's far more difficult for the opposition team. But it's strange that it's taken a 5-0 whopping to suddenly realise that actually this is the best way that they should play.
Isn't it incredible? And also it's taken multiple transfer windows where they have signed players who aren't suited to the system. Like you can throw Donny van de Beek in there. You can definitely throw Jadon Sancho into the exact type of player who would not play well in the system, who there simply is not a position for a right winger or somebody who plays on the right of a front three in this system. So it's extraordinary that this is the sort of lack of planning or lack of thinking that's gone on around the club.
Well, yeah, especially when, I mean, I'm not quite sure how long Ole's been there, but he's been there for quite a few transfer windows. And the basic idea of the manager is to build the team. And when you build the team, you build it in a certain way where you know you want to play. And, you don't necessarily get all the best players, but you get players who can play in the system and do a really, really good job for you. So, I mean, the young lads, the likes of Rashford and Green, looking at the weekend thinking, crikey, we might not be getting in this team. You know what? Never a bad thing, because if and when they do, if somebody Cavani gets injured or something, or Ronaldo, then obviously they've got to come in and prove that they're worth a place. But I think they've now got a little bit of a competition for places. In fairness to Ole, last week, obviously, he must have, after Sunday, must have worked hard with them, and this was the shape. They've probably been working on it all week, and it worked. The only problem is Tottenham were woeful, and they really seriously were woeful.
On that, Mark, like, can you kind of imagine yourself as a player if you were playing nowadays? You're playing in an amazing stadium against Manchester United, great atmosphere in the place when you're going well. You're playing for a club that looks after you, pays you very well. You're playing for a manager who, by all accounts, is a good man, and you produce a performance like that. I mean, how can, because these players surely haven't become bad people overnight. How is this happening?
Well, Kane doesn't look like he's enjoying himself, does he? That's the first thing. He worked hard enough, but you can just almost see in his body language at times, which is, I should have gone to Manchester City, which I think will probably happen now, in January. It's affected Son as well, because Son is a real top player. He doesn't quite look the same. And I thought Lucas Moura was the only one who looked like he was capable of doing anything at the weekend, and they took him off. And a lot of the other players just look like 9-to-5ers. They just look fairly ordinary players. So that's obviously a massive problem for Tottenham. They're going to have a rethink. I mean, it sounds, with the noises coming out of Tottenham, that Nuno might be gone within the next few days. Well, I mean, what a sad and sorry state of affairs that is.
When you say 9-to-5ers, do you kind of mean like clocking in, clocking out, basically turning up and doing no more?
Well, not as in just they're just like normal players. There's nothing exactly special about them. We know the goalkeeper's not been good for 18 months, 2 years. I can't for the life of me remember how many times they've changed the players at the back, whether they're centre backs or whether they're full backs. And they just look like they've got an ordinary team, but it's not an ordinary team if Son and Kane are firing. It then becomes a good team. But they're not.
Yeah, and when you say that about Kane as well, Mark, because just Owen was speculating before the show that would Manchester City sign a player who looks like he's down tools? But do you think his legacy is now tainted at Spurs if this goes on much further? No. I think he's a top player who's just got a bit of a monk on at the moment with the club because they wouldn't let him go. So no, I think it really is a top player. Listen, for all we know, we might be thinking, don't get injured till January the 1st, and then I can go. Look, you don't know with these lads, but I think he seems to be a really honest guy. His work ethic, there's nothing wrong with it. He's trying very, very hard. He hardly had any chances. Let's put it that way. That's the first thing. The service was really, really poor. But you can just almost see in his body language, it's like, nice stadium, but what am I doing here?
Can that change at any point during the season, like in terms of your stance there, that he's got enough credit in the bank to either A, earn a big move, or B, not have his legacy tarnished? If this continues as the season goes on, or the body language continues to be poor, is there a chance that Manchester City turn around and say, listen, not sure if this guy's worth whatever it's going to be in January, £120 million?
Well, maybe that's what they're hoping. No, but maybe what they're hoping is it's not 120 million, it's gone down to 100, so save the 20 big ones. Look, he's a top player. So, yes, they wanted him. I can't believe that they never took him, which is very, very strange for me. And then one or two people now saying, well, they weren't that interested in him. I'm not sure that was true. I think that's all part of the politics of trying to get the price down. But, no, I think if Tottenham said on the 1st of January, opening the transfer window, that it was available for sale, I think this time there'd be more than one. I think there'd be 1, 2 or even 3 teams maybe want to take him.
On the Nuno front then, I mean, it's an awful situation for them to be in if they have to sack this guy, considering they went through how many managers before actually arriving on this guy. It's not exactly like the managerial roundabout has got filled up with other candidates. Antonio Conte's name seems to be linked with him, but they kind of did the groundwork during the summer, Mark, in terms of finding a new manager, and they ended up with this guy. Now they got to do the groundwork all over again. Are they really going to find a better manager?
Well, who knows? They're now saying Fonseca, aren't they?
Yeah.
I think he was close at the time, so they'll know his thoughts. They'll know what and how he wants to play. So that's probably a bonus to them. And I think the fact that Nuno didn't cost them any money, and I think I'm right in saying has he got 2 years contract?
Yeah, and there was some report as well that they can get rid of him without a massive payoff as well. I'm not sure when that can happen. I'm not sure if it's now or if it's in the middle of the season or the end of the season, but it won't be too damaging.
I'll tell you what that will be. That will be that if the team don't qualify for the Champions League, that'll be a big thing in terms of his bonus. Well, if he goes today, he's not qualifying for the Champions League because it's impossible at the moment because he's still got games to play. So that wouldn't surprise me. Chief exec at Tottenham is a very wily so-and-so, and he knows what he's doing. But in terms of this appointment, and it's not working out for them. And the problem is as well is that once people, well, you heard it, didn't you, in terms of the crowd. I mean, and a lot of them cleared off anyway, way before the end. And I just don't think it looks good for him. I don't know how he's really going to survive, to be honest with you. But he is one of the good guys.
It was a pretty extraordinary weekend in the Premier League elsewhere, Mark. Saturday, 3 o'clock kickoffs, Manchester City getting beaten at home, Liverpool dropping points at home to Brighton. This was not an outcome anybody would have seen after the first 10-15 minutes at Anfield on Saturday. What changed? What did Brighton bring to proceedings that rattled Liverpool after they went 2-0 up?
Well, they were always a threat. I think that's the first thing. And once you carry that threat, obviously it also gives you a little bit of thinking, well, we can pinch a goal here or whatever. I think Liverpool were just off. It happens, and do you know what? Quite often it happens after you've had some outstanding results. And of course, you know what it's like in this game at the moment. That you go to Man United and you win 5-0, and everything's absolutely brilliant. And then the next game, you get a little bit of a not quite the performance that you wanted. And normally with Liverpool, even when they have that, they have the ability to win the game. I mean, obviously the Mane VAR goal was a big thing, because if that had been awarded, that was good night. That was ending up 4 or 5, wasn't it? Which the fine lines there are. And I think Graham Potter actually said that, the Brighton manager. They just weren't at it. And I think that's what Klopp will have said to them, that, look, every week you try to be 9 out of 10, and occasionally when you're 8 or 7, that's when you've really got to hanker down and basically win the game by hook or by crook, and that just wasn't there at the weekend. Brighton played well. I mean, in the City game, I mean, it was amazing. When I heard it was 1-0 to Palace quite early on, I thought, well, they'll be back and they'll win 3, 4 or even 5, and they just probably weren't. They're another one that quite weren't at the races after brilliant performances in Europe as well.
What do you make of Potter, actually? Because the performance, Brighton basically went at Liverpool from the get-go. They had a chance after about a minute, a really, really good chance, but actually possibly the best chance of anyone had in the whole game. They were toe-to-toe. Second half, Lawro, I thought they looked actually the better side, and Klopp spoke about. But does he emerge as a coach now that other teams will look at and say, actually, the narrative around who replaces Solskjaer isn't going to go away? Obviously, Spurs are looking for a manager. Are there managers from within England that can go on to better things? Because he just hasn't played such a lovely brand of football as well.
Yeah, look, he's season by season he got better. His teams have got better. And you look at the moment, you say they're doing a really, really good job. But are you seriously saying that? Are one of the top 4 or one of the supposed top 6? Are they looking at him as manager? Possibly. Do I think it's a little bit early? Yep. I think if they have a really good season and manage to nick a top 10 place, then I think people will seriously look at him. I mean, know all about Brighton. Obviously, I had 4 years there, and they're a fantastically run club. I mean, the owner, Tony Bloom, they don't owe anybody any money. He's, built the stadium. He's built a brand new training ground. It's all good. They can attract players. The recruitment's good. You sell White for 50 million and you bring 2 or 3 players in, which obviously makes economic sense, certainly. So, and the way he plays is good, but it's just a little bit early. I think we're always just, it's like anything. Everybody overreacts in the Premier League at the moment because it is the best league in the world, but it's almost. So Liverpool only draw and they're going, oh, what's happened to Liverpool? They beat Man United next week. Well, it's just the way the Premier League is. So he's got a chance and he's improving, and that's all that he can do is improve the team every single year. And I mean, the great problem last year was that they'd take the lead, couldn't get a second goal. Or this year, I mean, obviously, even now they've only scored 11 in 10 anyway, but they've stopped conceding. And what they have now is they don't need that many chances actually to win a game, which if you think about it is not a bad way to play.
Yeah, it's been a complete 180. This time last year they were creating loads of chances, couldn't get points on the board, and now it seems that they're overachieving as opposed to their chances, which is, as you say, a sign of how clinical they are. Like, just on that theme, and like across Saturday, like you mentioned the City result, the incredible thing about what Brighton and Palace did on Saturday was that this wasn't like Sam Allardyce's West Brom getting something off Klopp at Christmas. This was really well thought out, methodical. If you like XG, they both won on XG as well as on the scoreline. So has there been a shift, Mark, around those mid-table sides where it's like, okay, parking the bus and trying to nick a 1-0 win just is not going to wash against these big teams anymore?
Well, you know what it is. I think the longer you're in the Premier League, you can buy better players. Because the money gets better and better, and that's what it is. I mean, what it has done, all this money now, is it's made a lot of those teams basically just into better teams because they can attract, as I said, better players. I mean, I did an interview with the local Brighton paper on Thursday last, and I said it would be footballing suicide if Brighton took on Liverpool at Anfield. So it tells you what I know about it, doesn't it?
At least you admitted it, Lawro, though, anyway.
I've been reminded on Twitter by about 72,000 people so far.
Yeah, in fairness, though, like to give yourself some kudos there, you may not have, I guess, forecast how the game developed and how Liverpool looked so open straight away. Like Fabinho's loss it was so apparent. Keita obviously went off injured, so they've a major hole in the defensive sort of midfield position. And like, do you see that defence as solid as it once was? And I guess the question that Liverpool fans might be a small bit afraid to ask is Van Dijk quite as good as he was pre-injury? Or like, well, it did surprise me that like Brighton to win at Liverpool on XG at Anfield with Liverpool's front three in the form they're in is fairly staggering.
Is it? Yeah. Well, Virgil's he's not quite at it. But when I say he's not quite at it, he's not world class every week. He's had a couple of iffy days. And he's obviously got new partners as well, which probably doesn't help. So no, they don't look quite the same. But I keep saying to you, this happens in football. You can't be brilliant every week. I mean, the City result I just thought was staggering. I mean, Palace have done really, really well, but kept drawing and drawing. But they look a completely different team and very much an in-your-face team, which is good. And for them, I mean, I'd hate to think what the price was for Palace to go and win at Man City 2-0, because I wish I would have had some of it. But it's the Premier League. And as I say, the longer you're in it for, shall we say, smaller clubs, the better chance you have of getting a better team, because you get more and more money. And that's the great thing about the Premier League. Yes, okay, the top four will always be the top four, and because they can just get the best players. But that level underneath, what you find now is that you can go shopping there in terms of buying footballers, and you can get a kind of not necessarily young, but maybe early 20s player that you think can train on. And I think Brighton have done that. It looks like Palace might have done that as well with one or two of their players, and it increases the potential of the team, and increases the fact that they can go to places now and really hold their own and not just sit and park the bus as it was.
Chelsea have had a much kinder recent schedule than Liverpool. But is there any level of concern from a Liverpool perspective that you see someone like Keita going off injured at the weekend, and Chelsea have also had injuries, and yet they're killing teams, yet the next man up does seem to be as good as the person who's got injured in a lot of areas, that they just have depth, ridiculous depth in so many areas that Liverpool simply just don't have, and they might be a little bit more of a victim to fortune than Chelsea would be over the course of a 38-game season?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Mind you, the last 2 Chelsea games are what? Norwich at home and Newcastle away.
Yeah, very kind fixtures.
Yeah, which are win-wins. No, you're right. And I think, and we'll probably be talking about this all the season, which will be, they miss Wijnaldum. And Wijnaldum, I think, misses them because obviously he's not in PSG's team. He's sat on his backside on the bench. So he was one of Klopp's favourite players because he carried everything out to the absolute letter of what he asked him to do in games. So they miss him. I mean, Keita, what is in his 4th year now? We know he's a good player. Has he really shown as a good player over 3 or 4 months consistently? You'd argue no. Fabinho, obviously, they missed. Thiago, unfortunately, coming towards the end of his career, just keeps getting knocks, a bit like Matip as well, and they're out for a while. And Curtis Jones is obviously comes into play, and it's the way it's going to be. He's said all along that he's going to have to kind of balance the squad throughout the season, and take players out and bring players in and freshen it up that way. But with Liverpool is what I like about them now is the fact that in terms of the transfer market, they decide who they're going to go and buy, and basically nobody really knows until they bought them. If you look at Van Dijk, Alisson, Jota, there was nobody knew anything about Jota, and even Van Dijk to a certain degree, because loads of clubs were chasing them, and bang, Liverpool just went in and got him, and we all thought 75 million. Wow, you're having a laugh, but obviously you can double that now. So that's their thing, and I think because they hardly did any business in the earlier window, and I think January will probably, I won't say go to the Americans, that the Americans will already know, FSG will already know, and he might go, look, if we're in up with the Super League thing, is they've always backed him, because I tell you every time I'm on this programme, is that they've got a sporting franchise and they know how it works. You get injuries, you get a loss of form, and you've got to keep improving the side.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one thing to finish up on then, Mark, from yesterday's games, West Ham United's win against Aston Villa 4-1, and just some beautiful football. The final goal in particular, just great sense of unselfishness from Antonio then Lanzini for Bowen to tap into an empty net. Moyes has them playing brilliant football. Of course, Europe might be a little bit of a stumbling block over the next little while, but you have to make them a real contender for that 4th spot.
No.
Okay.
No.
Not having it.
And I'll tell him that to his face as well. No. And listen to him yesterday after the game. He said, we can still do a lot better. That's absolutely 100% the way that it is. I think the problem is that, and I think he's very much aware of this, if you lose Antonio, and Antonio hasn't got the best hamstrings in the world. He has got 2 of them, but they're not the best. He'll have 2 or 3 weeks out. But as Moisey said, the problem with that is he then needs another 2 or 3 weeks to get fit, because he's such a big unit and he's such a good player. And he said, we've got nobody else like him. So, and they're in every flipping competition, aren't they? Which he's happy with, but I know already he's thinking, crikey, come March time, we might have hardly any players. But they've done great. He's a good manager if you give him time. I mean, the Man United must look at him now and must think, oh my goodness, what a mistake we made. But that's a different story.
Yeah, I mean, like, what would have happened? What do you think would have happened had they just stuck with him for another couple of seasons? Just respected the fact that he wasn't Alex Ferguson, and that nobody was going to be Alex Ferguson, and that things weren't going to be that good all the time.
And also, if you really think about it, going back to Sir Matt Busby, how many managers did they have until they got somebody? So they'd already experienced the fact that he had this icon of a manager, and it's always going to be very, very difficult when somebody else comes in. Moisey builds teams. That's what he does. And I know generally now in the Premier League, you don't get time to do that. And maybe at Manchester United, the big clubs, you definitely don't get time to do it. But that's you know, you don't have to look at what he did at Preston when he started, but obviously at Everton. And he made them fortunes as well. Not that Man United would need to make fortunes in terms of selling players. He made Everton fortunes, absolute fortunes in some of the players that they bought cheaply and sold on. He's just a really good manager if you give him time. And everyone thinks, you know, his dowry is this, is not. I mean, away from the game, he so isn't. But he's just a really, really good manager. And the other thing as well that he always says about the people at West Ham is when he goes to ask for something, they very, very rarely say no. He said they've been great with him.
It is mad that to think that, you know, like, I think Rice has spoken about this, how everyone is just so happy in training, and it's a complete antithesis, I guess, Lawro, to how you would imagine from the outside. Manchester United players, probably, it didn't look like anyone was, you know, they didn't look like they were enjoying themselves. And to be fair, I think he got the shortest time of any manager since Ferguson, and I think it's the one thing in football. Managers in general get sacked far too readily, I think we can all say with him that was the case here, because his record either side of it is phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, he always says about West Ham is that the signing of the two Czech Republic players has been massive for him, because relatively they didn't cost that much money. He said, but they've been brilliant. He said, you go training and they stop behind straight away. And he said, sometimes you have to go out and say, look, that's enough. You know, don't do any more, because you ruin your legs for the weekend. He said, but what's happened is there's a knock-on effect. He said, then everybody's doing it. And he said, you know, sometimes in training when they turn up and you kind of, you know, and I've done it myself, we've all done it, you think, oh, I don't fancy training today. It's raining and it's this and it's whatever. He said, it's not like that. And he said, it's very, very, very competitive. And he said, you know, people like Rice, who's obviously a top player, but even the, you know, the senior pros as well that they have, said they've all bought into the fact that you've got to work really, really hard and then a little bit more, and you'll get your rewards. And that's exactly what they've got so far. But as he'll tell you, they've won absolutely nothing yet.
We're completely out of time, Mark, but in a word, who's going to get fourth place then if West Ham aren't in the race?
Man United.
Yeah, fair enough. Mark Lawrenson, thanks a million.
Pleasure.
Cheers. Mark Lawrenson there on the line. It is 8:31 on this Monday morning. You're with us here on OTB AM. Plenty of comments coming through this morning. You can tweet us at Off The Ball or comment on the YouTube stream as well. John says it's windy coming into winter. Groundbreaking stuff from John there in the comments. Neil says, good man Johnny, front and centre of every conversation, please. Mark says Solskjaer always seems to be able to pull out a result when he really needs it. It is weird. While Gray says it's the players protecting their holiday by keeping Ole in a job, which is an interesting theory.
They did have, like, apparently they had a kind of a team meeting Tuesday. I always think that's kind of a bad thing. Like, why do you need to have a team meeting? You just shouldn't be performing like as ineptly as they did against Manchester United. And it's just like, you know, you mentioned the XG of Palace at Man City and Brighton. Like, there's a lot more than the bare result now to look at nowadays. You can look at the GPS of players. You can look at, there's so many things apart from the naked eye that can help you in terms of performances. And I would say all the metrics are that Spurs were just absolutely crap on Saturday, and I don't think that performance means that much. Like, you cannot surely, in this day and age, if you're going to make it, you're going to completely change your system, play three at the back, put two players the average age of 35 up front with each other, play Matic behind them. As a long-term Premier League strategy, that to me is absolutely going nowhere. But I don't know, maybe I'm like Lawro with Brighton going toe-to-toe with Liverpool and I'm just way wrong. And
maybe there is no room for a long-term strategy anymore, considering if they don't get top four, it is a calamity given the money that they've spent.
Do you reckon they'll get top four?
Well, I think that if they take a short-term view, like playing your best team for the here and now, they will. Like, they've got the squad. They've definitely got a top four squad.
They have, yeah.
Definitely. I think so.
They have. No, I actually think they're very good players. It's just Ronaldo's going to be a problem. Like, it's simple as that, because it's just he's not able, obviously, to press. And in this modern game, it's, as much as Keane says, sit in. It's hard, and if maybe now after the last couple of weeks they'll say, well, we're not going to go gung-ho, but they won't be playing Spurs every week. That's the problem. If they're playing Brighton and they're playing a so-called unfashionable club, if they're playing West Ham and these are clubs around them, they'll struggle. Like, they will struggle because they've serious holes. And funnily enough, any opposition analyst looking at the Liverpool performance Saturday will say we can get at Liverpool here as well, especially once Fabinho is out. So interesting times ahead, but Man United have serious problems still. As long as Ronaldo is playing, there will be problems elsewhere.
The teams that took points off City and Liverpool on Saturday will be very interesting United fixtures. So they play Palace on the 5th of December and they play Brighton on the 18th of December. It's that calibre of team, the up and coming team in really good form, but still not expected to have as much possession as a team like Manchester United. But again, outscoring Liverpool and City on unexpected goals at the weekend. That's the real calibre of team. That'll be a real test for Solskjaer over the next little while.
I know, like we mentioned, like sport is the great escapism, but the Premier League this season has so much going for it.
It does.
It really does. Yeah. And Lawro makes a good point there. Like the funding structure of the league is such that it's quite an egalitarian funding system. It does give the smaller teams a reasonable financial kind of like stability there. And the longer you're in the Premier League, you can develop players. If you give your manager time, there's a good income coming in from various revenue streams. And this season, it genuinely looks like there won't be that many dead rubbers relative to other seasons. And like, leagues aren't good when you're talking about the challenges facing Gaelic games and all that. When you've so many dead rubbers, like, it just really takes away from the overall value. And when you have Palace winning 2-0 at Man City and Brighton probably should have won at Liverpool on the same day, you're like, okay, this could be a pretty exciting campaign here, because we definitely have a title race. We don't know who's going to finish fourth, and there's a lot else going on besides.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be very interesting to see how things develop over the next little while. Just to mention, by the way, that Liverpool fans won't want to miss our latest Cadbury FC roadshow. We're going behind the scenes at Anfield with legendary striker Robbie Fowler. We'll also be joined by Liverpool captain and Ireland international Niamh Fahey and former Liverpool midfielder and physio Richie Partridge. It's all with thanks to Cadbury FC and their club partnerships, granting you behind the scenes access at the Premier League's biggest clubs, coming soon to OTB Sports social channels. Now, earlier on in the performance rankings, we mentioned Club GAA. We didn't really get into it too much. It was in the green, Johnny, because we spent a lot of time over the last month, 2 months, talking about the future of the intercounty game. Intercounty football, obviously, was all that was up for grabs on that particular front. But I think maybe we kind of forgot that what was going on in the background was the best part of the GAA season, which is the club GAA season. I think last year the pandemic was really good to it. I think the fact that it came before the intercounty season really gave it a kick. But I'm really looking forward to next year and the year after and every year beyond that of this proper split season, when things are properly bedded in, when this is a season that has a proper rhythm to it and that everybody understands when these big games are on. Because what we got at the weekend was like a number of really, really good things. We should say as well that if anybody was at any GAA games or any of the storylines that we are definitely going to miss here, drop us a tweet, drop a comment, and we'll get to them throughout the next hour or so, because there was so much that happened and we're not going to get to all of it. We're going to do a quick rundown of what happened, some of the big stories. We're going to start with the hurling here, first of all. Tipperary, we had semi-finals there. John McGrath scored 112, Johnny, which is quite the tally for Lockmore Castellani. They beat Barnsley 118 to 115, and they'll play Thurles Sarsfields in that final. Sarsfields beat Killadangan, the reigning champions, on Saturday. In Clare then, you had Ballier, who of course, have the power of Tony Kelly, but not with Tony Kelly on this particular occasion. They managed to get into a Clare Hurling Championship final without him. They beat Newmarket and Fergus by a point, and they'll face Ina Kilnamona in the final, while Dublin na Fianna are into the final for the first time ever in the hurling. They'll face Kilmacud, who knocked out Coola in their semi-final, which a lot of people will have seen yesterday. A decent game, that one. And I mentioned earlier on the Donegal Hurling Championship final. This was the big one. St. Eunan's won their first Donegal Hurling title since 1972. Brilliant scenes if you look around on social media. Eugene Organ, he's from Ennistimon in County Clare. He's been living up there for 20 years trying to get this club up and running, trying to get them back to winning a first title in just under 40 years, and they managed to get over the line on Saturday, wasn't it? So those scenes worth checking out. In the football then, this was the big story from the football. It came yesterday. It was the Offaly County final. It was Road and Tullamore. The game finished 1-8 apiece. Road were a man down and 5 points down at the second water break. But Niall McNamee, with the last kick of the match, sent the game to a replay. Have a look. This is from the Offaly GAA Twitter account.
Again, The free trying to be taken quickly. Kieran Byrne steps in. Ball comes forward. Last chance as Anton Sullivan kicks it inside. Lion McNamee had it now. Turn, shoot. Goal! Goal for Rome!
Got extra time and then the penalties. I think that's the way it should have gone, but we're going to get another helping of that. Is it next weekend? I think it is next weekend, the replay of that game. So 1-8 apiece to finish at O'Connor Park. You might have seen as well the Tyrone madness on Saturday. I think this was on RTE. I was in Tralee. I didn't actually keep an eye on what was happening on TV, but there was this crazy semi-final between Errigal Kieran and Cole Island. Cole Island were 7 points behind with 10 minutes to play. They were already without red carded Michael McKernan, obviously one of their best players, and they'd been down to 13 men beyond that as well. But they scored 3 goals in the last 10 minutes with 13 men to win 3-6 to 14 points. Padraig Hampsey is Cole Island's captain, by the way. And then in the other semi-final, it was also relatively crazy, not on that level, but Dromore won in that semi-final. They were 7 points up early in the game. Then they went 5 points behind, but then ended up coming back again to win by 1 point against Trillick. So it's going to be Dromore against Cole Island in that final. Tyrone, the epitome of a county where these players would die for each other in the red and white of Tyrone, and then they would kill you on the pitch in the club season. Not unique.
I don't know. Like I was talking to a couple of inter-county players during COVID, and obviously the whole training system had changed, and one guy was just telling me how much he enjoyed being back with his club. And I think this is like I'm not involved day to day with the Gaelic with the GAA club, but people who read the papers and they follow, like, you know, the what's on TV or whatever, like, and are not necessarily directly involved with the coalface. Club GAA is the lifeblood of the organisation. The inter-county thing was always, it was a representative thing where you played for your club. The club guys got together, but the club, you know, winning the Club All-Ireland was more important than winning on All-Ireland itself. Many players will tell you, and I think we've totally lost sight of that because we've a professional, all but professional, you know, inter-county system now at the top level, and it's taken away so much from what this means. And like Tommy Conlon's article last week about
Ballinamore,
like I honest to God, I thought that to talk about summing up, Leitrim will never win an All-Ireland, but Ballinamore could win a Leitrim County Championship. And to as you mentioned there, on like to win a, you know, the Donegal hurling championship, first time in 50 odd years, and like my own club St Brendan's were on the cusp of getting to a final to get back to senior. I think in my lifetime Brendan's might have been in senior 1 or 2 years, and have basically been down to the depths in recent years, but have a good young team with a couple of lads playing around about 40, a couple of lads older than me playing who were giving it a good shot this year. They got to play Dunmore on Saturday. Everyone from the parish was completely immersed in it, and they lost the game obviously, so they missed that chance to go to senior. But I dare say that the people at home are far more invested in that than they would be with Galway footballers at the moment.
100%.
Do you know what I mean? It just means so much.
But I think also as well, Johnny, if you're really invested in the Galway footballers, that almost increases your appetite for the club championship as well. So
100%, yeah.
And it just exists without it. Like, so I was down in Tralee on Saturday night watching the double header there. There was obviously a load of other games on in Kerry, and for me, the county championship in Kerry is my favourite competition in any sport in the world.
And a high standard, I suspect.
It's just fantastic because you've got these divisional teams that come together. And in this case, because the club championship, which is different to the county championship, had just rolled into it, these divisional teams had only 2 training sessions with one another. So they had this massive handicap going into this year's championship. And what you had was East Kerry, who had won back-to-back titles because, you know, the Cliffords play with them, and the Cliffords are always going to be, well, they'll be with them until Fuss to do something extraordinary over the next little while. They've got Paul Murphy, who was their captain last year. I counted maybe 5 or 6 players on the pitch who'd got inter-county experience with them versus one or two for Austin Stacks, the most obvious being Kieran Donaghy. Now, people from Tralee were saying that this was not an upset whatsoever, and they're probably right. Stacks were club champions from only a couple of weeks ago, but it was still extraordinary to see them completely stymie this team who had won 2 in a row, with one of the greatest footballers of all time not being given a kick. Didn't score from play at all on Saturday night, ended up getting sent off. David Clifford laid on with a second card, and it was just this glorious sort of, we are going to crush you and we are not going to allow you to come to Tralee, come to our home patch and walk all over us and try and show us that you're going to be worthy of getting this 3 in a row. These beautiful, terrible conditions, rain pelting down on the shed. You know, when you're inside and
the rattle,
the proper rattle on the roof. Kind of almost feeling sorry for the players out there, but also realising that the players are just in heaven at the moment, especially those Stacks players. And it was a total war, that second game. And I was just like, this is the best of the best. This is as good as the GAA.
Kerry's a really, like, Kerry's a place apart in so many ways. Like, probably my favourite place in the entire world. West Kerry, like, and the Blaskets and all that, like Dingle, it has everything going for it. But like, you're as you say, the divisional thing and the representative type thing that they do there. Like, so, like, what is the rallying cry? Like, when, like, if you're a Brendan's fan at home, it's like, come on Brendan's, like, or come on the Tribe if you're a Galway fan. Like, did the boys start roaring, come on East Kerry? Like,
see, they don't. Obviously, you're taking the piss, but you're right. Like,
I actually do wonder, like, is there a rallying sort of, what do we call ourselves here? Like, because we're a representative team. Like,
I think it differs, like, because teams are in and out of the divisional sides. If you're good enough, you get promoted to senior, and with East Kerry, a lot of the teams are good enough intermediate sides that they flitter in and out of actually being solo teams in the championship. So they're kind of mercenary in a way.
Mercenary.
Like, I mean, it's probably a bad way of describing it, but like Paul Murphy, for example, would prefer to be playing with his own club at senior level, but they're at intermediate right now, so he drops down to being a divisional player. So it's unique for him. It was unique for him last year to be playing and captaining this side. Sorry, he wasn't captain. He wasn't captain, but it was unique for him to be playing in that team, whereas by and large they prefer to be on their own. So they'd missed that. Whereas Stacks on Saturday night was like they were at home. They lit off flares on 3 different occasions in the terrace.
Wow.
Kieran Donaghy playing full back in the second half when East Kerry had their first sending off, played a sweeper. He missed an open goal, by the way. He rounded the keeper and hit the post. They should have killed off East Kerry early on. But like these divisional sides, I don't want to say they dropped like flies at the weekend, but also in the first game, you had Cairns O'Reilly's going up against St. Kieran's. St. Kieran's is another divisional side, and you had Tommy Walsh kick 6 points right after retiring from Intercounty. Perhaps he should be, maybe we can delete that retirement statement. But it was also that kind of that same level of, if you're looking at a cohesion, if you're looking at it in sort of an emotive sense, just fighting for the jersey and knowing that these players would die for their club. Whereas sometimes you just don't have that with the divisional sides. There are exceptions, like South Kerry in particular would be unbelievably proud of the tradition they have, and especially were in those days when Declan O'Sullivan was captaining them to championships. But that is always the big conflict there between proper one club mentality and the collection of great players.
Kerry itself, right? So is there defiance in Tralee as well? Because like Tralee is so much the poor relation in terms of the tourism industry. It's like, it's Killarney, it's Dingle, it's like the coast, like Slayhead, all of that stuff, even South Kerry. Tralee is like, as much as it has the rose of Tralee, like it's looked down upon by many people. It's like, I wouldn't go into Tralee, sure, you can go to Killarney. And I'm sure as a Tralee person at that game, he or she is like, well, actually, I'm going to light a flare here. You're in my town, and like it's pelting rain, and you're not going to get out alive. Like
100% believe that was part of it on Saturday as well. Where it's like these boys coming over from East Kerry, from the tourism capital of the county. No way, we're gonna crush them and send them back with their tails between their legs, and that's exactly what they did.
Still no sign of Fungi though.
Still no sign of Fungi, which is an absolute disgrace. Don't know where he went off to. It is 8:47.
Disgrace is not the word. Like Fungi, he probably died. Like
he abandoned us.
Okay.
Things got tough during COVID, and he left when the chips were down. Not happy with that. It is 8:47 on this.
All the revelations this morning.
All the revelations. We will speak to Kathleen McNamee in a few moments. We have a news update coming as well, but before all that, here's Timmy McCarthy on the progress of Vera Pauw's Ireland.
If we qualified, Timmy, for Australia and New Zealand, just imagine the country getting up early in the morning to watch the team in their first World Cup. It would be a big game changer, and I just really hope they don't mess up now these 2 matches against Slovakia and Georgia, to keep the momentum going and get that playoff spot.
It will be really game changer because, first of all, we're great at following international teams, especially teams that qualify for big competitions, be it male or female. So I think what is important to understand though is we've won 1 game out of 2. We just, and Clearly said we have 2 very big games coming up now, and we need to keep the momentum going. It'll be amazing to qualify. I also would agree with Gavin, if we could fill the Tallaght Stadium first and have that rocking and rolling for the rest of these games. The Aviva Stadium could be the next qualifying campaign, but it'll be amazing to see an Irish women's team in the World Cup campaign finals. I also think that the coach has done an amazing job. I think that she came in with a big reputation, and we are now seeing the benefits of the reputation. She's implementing her style. She's mixing the old and the new as regards the players. And I was very impressed the other night in how they came back, because they got a brilliant goal to start, and then obviously Finland responded, and we just hung in there. And I think that's a slight difference in what I've seen in women's football at international level from Ireland as in previous campaigns.
Yeah, Timmy McCarthy there speaking on the Saturday panel. He was there alongside Cliona Foley and Gavin Comiskey, hosted by John Duggan. It's worth checking out. Really good chat on rugby, on the women's international team, on the Irish Sports Book of the Year as well. It's on the OTB Sports app right now, and you can watch it back on YouTube as well. Right, at 8:49 on this Monday morning, delighted to welcome Cathal McNamee to the studio. Cathal, how are you getting on?
Morning, lads. How are we?
Cathal is just he's chiming in on the love for the inter-county scene.
Well, the club scene.
The inter-club scene.
Oh, Cathal. You were there. You saw McNamee strike gold yesterday.
Yeah, I did. I tell you what, the goal was brilliant. I don't know, is there coverage at the point?
We just have your mic muted there. If you flick the top of the box, can we get a little bit of magic? Is he back? He's back.
There we go.
So you were there. You were there watching.
There. The goal was brilliant. The point that he kicked prior to that, I think he got it back down to 2. Absolutely unbelievable. Now, he was well marshalled by Tullamore. They had an extra player for a long part of the game, and they...
Nope. We are still just having issues with Cahill's mic there. We'll get back to Cahill in just a moment. I'll scoot this microphone over to you in just a moment if you can't get it. But
it's camaraderie there. Just
please speak amongst yourself, Johnny Ward.
Have my mic. Yeah, Cahill was making the point that McNamee was well marshalled by Tullamore. It's kind of like when on That's Race TV, the commentator just doesn't work, and the guy in the studio has to call the race, and he's just like, I don't really know who's in front here, but he's 3 lengths clear. Yeah, so we're improvising.
Yeah, go for Cahill.
I think you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Have you now? Yeah, they did marshal him really well. McNamee's a top class player. I don't know how he pulled that goal out, because he really had about half a foot to aim at in the right corner of the goal, and he somehow managed to get it in there. It wasn't a great county final by any stretch, to be honest. I think it certainly won't go down in terms of a classic with the Offaly footballing faithful, but it's going to be a replay, 2 weeks' time, I think it is. So
2 weeks, right?
Tullamore will be kicking themselves that they didn't go home with the cup.
What was it? So when the ball hits back of the net, is it kind of like, oh, okay, this was coming all along, or was it like, oh, geez?
Oh no, it was total disbelief, right? Because Tullamore, I think they probably sat back a little bit and tried to defend their lead. They were leading the whole way through. They got a great goal after 4 minutes through Aaron Levy, their midfielder, and they were leading the whole way through. They've got some really good underage players as well, Tullamore, but they were without Cormac Egan, one of the stars of the under-20 team from earlier on this summer. But it was just an unbelievable finish, and I think a great weekend of club football. I think there was good games in Tyrone. Yeah. The Galway semi-finals were really good in football. The defending champions in Tipperary and Dublin and hurling lost as well. So I think it's a great time of year. As good as any in the GA calendar, I think.
There's obviously a lot of disconnect with the inter-county game in several counties as well. So, like, you'd imagine the club is kind of where it's at for a lot of, like, the smaller counties.
Yeah, and of course you have the tiered system in the club system as well, so all the games tend to be really, really competitive, and even at intermediate and junior level. Even the Donegal hurling championship this weekend, I think St. Eunan's won a first title in 50-odd years. That might be something that goes under the radar, but I saw a post-match interview with their manager. Tears, emotion, how much it means to people in Letterkenny to get over the line there. And these stories are happening every weekend, and maybe they don't get the national coverage because they're in the local areas, but it's a time of great joy for so many parishes around the country.
I think that there's like such a national interest in pretty much all these stories, and like if there was like this world where there was endless resources, endless cameras and endless funds, and there was like some sort of Gillette Soccer Sunday, GA Sunday on all these GA matches, I suspect tons of people would tune in to see what was happening all around the country, because people are interested in all these narratives that come into the games. But also on a very simple point, like you love when TG Carr, and I know RT are doing it now as well, just have a random game on the Sunday in these terrible conditions because of a very simple thing. It's 30 minutes a half. You know that you can get sucked in. It's not too much of a time investment. You haven't seen these players play before, and there's a bit of a storyline going into it.
Yeah.
I think it's the greatest season, well, not the greatest season, but I think there's a great opportunity here to bring in the casual viewer when it comes to the club game.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think as you progress as well from the county scene into the provincial championships that we have this year in both hurling and football, there's some brilliant matches between the county champions in the various provinces, and that's to come now before Christmas as well. It's I suppose something that everyone can identify with that's involved in the GA, because we're all involved in clubs in our home areas or wherever we're living, and we can I suppose when you're involved in a club, you can sense what it would mean to get over the line, so you can appreciate when another club does, even if you don't have any relation to that county or any great grow for that county, you can understand what it means to the people, you can understand the emotion, and you hope that maybe someday you can experience it yourself.
Absolutely.
It's mad as well looking back in the Johnny Pilkington stuff, Burr, like in their heyday, taking on like Johnny Pilkington, Mark and Joe Cooney in a big game, and Joe Cooney was expected to dominate because he was playing for Sarsfields, and it brought back memories of Sarsfields, how big a team they were because of all the Cooneys in those days, and like these great stories down the years of these brilliant club teams. Caltra winning All Ireland when I was a kid. I went to school with so many of them people because the Meehans were around at that time, and it's often families like of many kind of families and cousins like that kind of can carry a club to these glories, and often, as I say, it means more to them than playing for the county.
Absolutely. Cathal, what else is going on this morning?
Well, we'll start with the news of football, and Andrew Omabamidele scored, of course, for Norwich yesterday in their 2-1 loss to Leeds in the Premier League. It's his first Premier League goal for the club. But the Canaries have struggled so far in this campaign. They remain rooted to the bottom of the table, and speaking afterwards, Omabamidele said they will continue to battle hard.
It's obviously a proud moment for me. It's my first Premier League goal, but at the end of the day we want to win the game, and it was disappointing. It was disappointing to say the least. I thought the lads dug in. We were on top of the game for most of the first half, and I think we just need to just kind of work harder on the moments that we're a bit under pressure. But yeah, we can't dwell on it. It's the thing in football. There's always the next game, so we need to just try and nip it in the bud tonight, assess it tomorrow, and just move on as quick as we can.
So that's Andrew Omabamidele. That result, by the way, lifts Leeds up above the relegation zone into 17th. Elsewhere yesterday, West Ham won their third consecutive Premier League game and fifth in all competitions, beating Aston Villa 4-1. They're now up into fourth level with Manchester City in third. Good news for Katie McCabe yesterday as well. Her Arsenal side qualified for the FA Cup final. They beat Brighton 3-0 to secure a place in the decider. Megan Connolly was part of the Brighton team. Arsenal now set to play Chelsea in that final at Wembley early next month. There's one game in the Premier League this evening. Wolves and Everton meet at Molineux from 8 o'clock. Just 1 point separating the sides in the table ahead of Kickoff. Everton in 9th, Wolves 2 places further back in 11th. And the Toffees boss Rafa Benitez says the best way to rebound from a heavy defeat is to win tonight. His side were leading 2-1 at Goodison Park last Saturday, but went on to lose 5-2 to Watford. Benitez says it's important that his side remain united.
Yeah, the main thing is to be sure that we stick together as a team. We are compact, and then the easiest way will be winning the next game. So it's as simple as that. But I'm not sure that the Wolves will not agree with me. So we will try to be sure that we are as competitive as we have been during the rest of the season.
Kick-off for that one at Molineux this evening is at 8. Elsewhere on the managerial front, Tottenham are reportedly considering the future of head coach Nuno Espirito Santo after just 17 games in charge. They've now lost 5 of the last 7 Premier League games. They sit 8th in the table. Spurs failed to register a shot on target in Saturday's 3-0 defeat to Manchester United, and reportedly discussions happening around his future in the role. Football here tonight at home as well in the SSE Electricity League Premier Division. Some important games coming up this week in the race for European football tonight. Third place Sligo Rovers host already relegated Longford Town. That game's at the Showgrounds. There's a Dublin derby between St Pat's and 5th place Bohemians at Richmond Park. That too is a dress rehearsal for the FAI Cup final later this month, and Finn Harps host Drogheda in Ballybuffet tonight as well. Waterford's game with Derry City rescheduled until tomorrow. We spoke about Gaelic games just to tidy up some of the results yesterday in club football from around the country. Porrick Pierces, they're the Roscommon Senior Football Champions, their second title in 3 years. They're managed by Pat Flanagan, who's managed a number of counties on the inter-county front. They won by 2-8 to 11 points against Clonagale at Dr. Hyde Park. We mentioned the Offaly final, where Niall McNamee's last gasp goal rescued a 1-8 apiece draw for Road against Tullamore. That game is set for replay on November 14th. Coal Island qualified for the Tyrone football final with the dramatic 3-6 to 14 points win over Errigal Kieran in Galway. Currafin and Mount Bellemoy will clash in the football final there, while in hurling the defending champions of both Dublin and Tipperary lost out over the weekend. Caladangan were beaten by Thurles Sarsfields in the Tip semi-finals, while Coola lost at the same stage to Kilmacud Crokes in Dublin. And finally, in news of golf, Seamus Power and Graham McDowell both had encouraging finishes on the PGA Tour last night. They finished on 10 under par at the Bermuda Championship. That was good enough for a tie tie of 12th place, 5 shots off the leader and winner. Lucas Herbert of Australian Herbert won the Irish Open earlier on this year at Mount Juliet.
All right, Carl, thanks for that. Good stuff. It is 8:58 on this Monday morning, and we're turning our attention back to those FA Cup semi-finals that you mentioned yesterday. It's going to be Chelsea against Arsenal, with of course Katie McCabe on show in the final in Wembley. We should mention as well that the first episode of the Koigig pod from OTB Sports is coming this week in association with Cadbury FC. It's one we're really looking forward to. Your host for that is going to be Kathleen McNamee, and she is with us this morning. Good morning to you, Kathleen.
Morning, guys. How are you?
Good, thanks. Did these semi-finals, were they as one-sided as the scoreline suggests?
Yeah, they definitely were. I think Brighton in particular performed incredibly well in the first half to keep Arsenal at 0-0 for 45 minutes. But they just didn't have that extra step whenever Arsenal did decide to take things up a level. As for City and Chelsea, I think you look at Chelsea's record when they travelled to City and it's never been great. And the fact that they were all over them, a couple of bad goalkeeping errors really let City down. But obviously that's an area that they're really have an issue with at the moment. They had a 16-year-old on the bench as their only other goalkeeping option, so it's not a great time for injuries in that part of the world. But they definitely were two very one-sided matches, and I think it'll be interesting to see when Chelsea and Arsenal come up against each other, because obviously Arsenal already have won one of those matches this season, and Emma Hayes will definitely be out for revenge.
Yeah, that's for sure. That City keeper ended up making a couple of remarkable saves late on in the game after a couple of howlers, which was, I don't know, some sign of a remnant of confidence in there as well. And you mentioned there then the clash between Arsenal and Chelsea, and Emma Hayes almost not calling out Arsenal but saying before the game that she wanted Arsenal to be their opponent in the final. Is that just some sort of statement of we want this to be the best fixture possible for hopefully what'll be a huge, maybe even record crowd at Wembley?
I think it's a mixture. I think Emma Hayes was very annoyed when they lost the first WSL fixture of the year to Arsenal. I mean, like, Arsenal and Chelsea has been such a great battle over the last few seasons in the league. And I think Jonas Eidevall was saying after the Arsenal match yesterday that he was like, I'm almost disappointed that Emma Hayes is looking forward to facing us, because I don't want that. I want her to be scared of us. Now, making Emma Hayes scared of a football team seems like a very tough task to do, so he may have his work cut out for him on that side. But I think it's a great week. I think the men are playing the same fixture, not the FA Cup, but like are playing each other that weekend. Arsenal are facing Barcelona later that week. So there's a lot of exciting matches around that time. And hopefully it does mean that you'll have the two best, well, probably the two best teams in the country in the women's context facing off each other. It'll be interesting because when Chelsea and Arsenal did face in the league, Chelsea had come off a very short pre-season. They had lost a lot of their players to the Olympics. I think that we're going to see a very different Chelsea side in this FA Cup match, and I think Arsenal won't be able to control it the way they did. It'll also be interesting because Arsenal have been playing like a much higher intensity game than they have been in previous seasons when it comes to things like injuries and just getting to that kind of Christmas period of the season where things are quite tight and there are a lot of matches, how their fitness and things like that will hold up, because that has been an issue for them in previous seasons. So it definitely is a mouth-watering clash, and when you consider the teams that could be in it, I think it probably is the best setup for the best game. Yeah, and you also kind of factor in the summer that a lot of these players had, and they've been playing quite some time. Even Miedema getting a rest yesterday, maybe kind of a show from Eidevall that, like, we've got a squad here, we can kill you regardless of who's up front for us. Yeah, exactly. Like Miedema, Tobin Heath, Lotwell Moy, they all got rested yesterday just because they had the Olympics, and it was a difficult time. Like, they didn't really have any time between all the internationals and everything to give them a break before now. And I think you look at Arsenal's squad this year, and it is, the depth there is amazing. Players like Beth Mead, who wasn't picked for the Olympics, has come out and like scored more goals than she has in any other season, is assisting at a crazy rate to everyone around her. Even players like Leah Williamson, she's already scored more goals this season than she has in previous ones. And then you have the likes of players like Katie McCabe, where Jonas Eidevall said before at the start of the season that he wanted to improve how much Arsenal score off things like set pieces. And as you know, Ireland fans will know how great Katie McCabe's set piece taking is. And again, they've already scored more set pieces this season than they did in the entirety of last season. So I think what he has really done is he's taken that review that Arsenal did last season when things really they were dipping, but they seem to have kind of caught them just on time. He's taken the foundations that Joe Montemurro put in place, and it has just elevated everyone in the team slightly. You look at the stats across the team and every single thing is just being improved slightly. And I also think his style of play is really interesting, that high press, especially in the final third, and the fact that he is making this team so comfortable playing out of possession, which has never been something Arsenal have been particularly comfortable doing. I think in some of the bigger games they've only had 40% of possession, but still come out and won at the other side. So it's going to be a really interesting battle against a Chelsea team that definitely isn't without its own firepower and style of play as well.
Katie McCabe as well. Like, I'd say there'll be a kind of a hype around that final here that wouldn't be normal at all for a Women's FA Cup final in Ireland, because she's just become such a big figure, and I think people will just be very interested to see how she gets on that stage as well.
Definitely. I think the great thing about this season as well is that it's quite easy to actually watch Katie's Arsenal games and all the other Irish players as well that are in the WSL. So it means that when she's going up against a team like Chelsea or even a team like Brighton, it's easier to know all the other players and you're not just watching just because of Katie McCabe. But I think definitely, and especially with the hype that's around the national team at the moment, you know, those matches are going to come just after the international window. So depending on how they go, there's going to be hopefully they will come with some wins and there'll be even more hype around Katie and the other players, and there will be a massive interest, and hopefully it does translate into crowds. One of the interesting things of this season is with the new broadcast deal, it hasn't really translated to crowds. If anything, it's probably slightly affected crowds.
That's very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, because I think looking at the matches at the weekend, they were quite poorly attended for what you would expect and even what we've seen in previous seasons, but they were both very easy to see on BBC and Sky. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues, and if it's the context of a big match in Wembley, will it be different? Because as well, Arsenal will be playing in the Emirates a couple of days later against Barcelona too. So those are two big stadiums to fill.
What sort of attendance are they expecting then for that FA Cup final? Because obviously the All-Ireland football final is always heralded as the biggest event in Europe. I presume it still has, so I'm just looking at it here, 45,000 is a record for an FA Cup final, which is still lower than a record for a women's All-Ireland football final here.
Yeah, that's the thing. We actually look at the attendances that you get for women's All-Irelands here, and they're incredible when you put it in the context of big sporting events across the continent. I would say they probably aren't going to try for a record crowd, just considering everything between COVID, the time of year, all those things. But I would hope that they would be able to get at least 20, 30,000 out for that sort of event. I think it's one of those ones where it's going to take a lot of marketing. The women's football weekend is in the second weekend of November, I think, as well. So events like that are always really good for pushing crowds out and kind of encouraging people to go. I think the context of the two teams, being Wembley and also Arsenal and Chelsea, you know, that will be helpful as well in terms of fans who want to get there. It's not people having to travel from Manchester. So hopefully it can get a big crowd, but either way, I think what this season has shown is that there's much more of a production around women's football, and that has just made it a much more enjoyable product to watch.
Okay. So in terms of the crowd then that'll be at that game, is there much of a harmony between your average Chelsea and Arsenal fan who goes to watch the men's, or is it developing its own sort of separate identity within the club? For match programmes at the men's games, do they make a big deal of how the women's teams are getting on, or do they have kind of separate identities, or how does that work?
It depends on the club you go to. So Arsenal have always had this kind of very much build a separate identity for the two teams while also integrating them slightly. So you will have mentions of the women's games in the men's match day programs, and you'll also have it vice versa. You'll have, say, men's players wishing the team good luck on big match days. You might even get some of the players coming to matches depending on where they are. For something like Wembley, I imagine, because as well as an FA Cup final, there will always be a much bigger display, and the club will put a much bigger effort behind it. And you could change it and look at a team like Manchester United have been heavily criticised in the past for the fact that they never used their men's social media account to push big games that the women were on, because they have such an incredibly massive following. Teams like City always tend to use the one social media account for everything, and then they also have a separate women's account which they will post specific content on. So it really just depends between the clubs, what they choose to do. I like the ones that kind of have a bit of a separate identity and also, also push things on the main accounts. I think for this match, you will see a lot of like cross club support, which is good. In terms of the actual crowd, you tend to get a much younger crowd. At women's games, they tend to be a lot more children and families, mostly because for a lot of people, the atmosphere is a lot more pleasant.
It's more affordable as well.
It's also, it's more affordable. It's a lot easier. Well, actually, it's a lot harder to get to in a lot of contexts if you're going out to Meadowview Park or one of these pitches that tend to be kind of off out of the city centre. But it is a lot more affordable. It has always pitched itself as like a family day out. And I know a lot of people in women's football are kind of eager for that to change, because you want to attract all sorts of crowds and not just say like women's football is just for kids, it's for everyone. But I think you look at a team like PSG and the sort of turnout that they get for their women's teams, where the ultras turn up no matter what it is, whatever team is playing. I think that's the sort of atmosphere that it would be great to promote around matches like these, that even the hardcore fans, if you watch every single Arsenal men's match or Chelsea men's match, then why wouldn't you turn up and support the women at the same time? Everyone loves when their club wins. It doesn't matter if it's under 8s or if it's the senior ones. You just want to get behind the team. It's
true. You mentioned there the Arsenal women have improved set pieces this season. Is it the same guru that's improved the men's team with set pieces, or what's going on with the parallel here?
I don't know. Maybe Katie McCabe is taking them in for lessons or what?
Possibly.
Yeah, it's interesting, the parallels that there has been. Well, it's not so much from the start of the season with the men's team, but more recently in the last couple of matches. I hope there is some guru going in and talking to the men's team about their set pieces, because it's been actually quite enjoyable to watch them the last couple of weeks, which it hasn't been in the past. And I know it's been said a million times before, but I think one of the main things for Arsenal and our improved form has been just having a bit more of a certain midfield, and shoring that up has definitely helped. And not having Arteta changing our positioning or changing what formation he wants to play every 5 days, it will also help in the long run.
Yeah, I think Nicholas Jover is getting all the credit for the men's team, the guy from City that they got. Are you seeing this Arsenal kind of surge at the moment as a possible top 4 contention, or is it way too soon to get that far ahead of ourselves?
It's far too soon for me. Having watched Arsenal for so many years, I know we go through these pockets of like quite decent form, and it does tend to be in the run up to Christmas, and then we just kind of seem to peter off, especially in recent seasons. So I hope it is the sign of something different, and that this is at least a more stable time for us as a team, because I think it hasn't been pleasant watching. And also for the team itself, there are too many talented players in there, like the Smith Rowes and the Sakas and stuff, that if we do want to hold on to them, we need to show some sort of consistency in the team. And again, my main worry would just be that sort of the depth in the team, in terms of if we do go through the sort of injury periods that we have in the past. Okay, we have one starting team that works, but what happens after that? What happens when one of those links gets injured and we have to throw on the players that we know can't perform? So I think it's hopefully the start of some sort of consistency, but there's also a lot of building still to be done, and especially in the bench depth.
The very, very, very bad news for Arsenal is that today is the 1st of November. It is going to be a disastrous month, no matter what happens, because it is Arsenal and it is November. Kathleen, very best of luck with the podcast, the Koi Gig pod from OTB Sports, coming this week in association with Cadbury FC. Really looking forward to episode 1. Thanks a million for taking the call this morning.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Kathleen McNamee there on the line. Let's tell you what's coming up on OTB Sports Radio today. From 1 o'clock, we've got OTB Gold, which is Paul McGrath talking about the Jack Charlton era. We've got State of the Union from 3 o'clock, and then the split season documentary on hurling from 4 o'clock. OTB Gold then from 6 o'clock is OTB Gold, which is an interview with Jack McCaffrey. And then from 7 o'clock, as ever, Off the Ball is live on your radio. We're going to have Pat and Evan, Monday Night Rugby, and all your usual favourites as Joe wraps up the weekend's sport. We are turning our attention now to rugby. Alan Quinlan is with us. Alan, good morning to you.
Morning, lads. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Should we start with Eddie Jones? Alan, does this... I'll just run through some of Eddie Jones's comments as we try and set you up there, because Eddie Jones on Friday in the London Times. There was a piece done by Owen Slott, which we'll come back to in just a moment. We're actually going to take a quick break because I've messed this whole thing up. We'll chat to you in a few.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
I think it's a very fickle world, professional sport.
Munster legends Alan Quinlan and Niamh Briggs are joining forces to bring you all the latest analysis, news, interviews and so much more.
We want better performances, we want more attack.
People might think that my Munster hat is too Munster. Got to get into a position where we're rewarding form as opposed to credit in the bank.
The Red 78 with Alan Quinlan and Niamh Briggs. Available every Wednesday. Don't miss a moment of action. Subscribe to the rugby channel on the OTB SPORTS app and turn on your notifications now.
Radio and audio in Ireland has never been more powerful, more effective, or had more opportunity for growth. And now Radio Centre Ireland is here, we're looking to accelerate. To do that, we're looking for a CEO. With a focus on increasing advertising investment and championing radio's unique advantages that make it so effective, flexible and impactful. We need a candidate with the experience, credibility and vision to lead, drive, influence, shape and grow this industry. Someone who will be our voice, representing and promoting radio to commercial partners and agencies alike as a medium that delivers return on investment. If that's you, we want to hear from you. And we know we will, because radio works. Apply now. Visit radiocentereireland.ie.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, proud supporters of Movember. Gentlemen, let's move.
You're welcome back. I'm sure the tension is palpable at this point. We can finally go to Alan Quinlan. Alan, how are you?
Morning, lads. How are you?
I mentioned there these Eddie Jones comments from last night. The Eddie Jones comments are interesting because they're in response to a piece in the London Times written by Owen Slott last week talking about how should I put this? A relatively toxic culture, I think, that exists within English rugby, where there's been a high turnover of coaches, a hugely demanding culture, to put it mildly, that is instilled by Eddie Jones. He was on Rugby Tonight with Craig Doyle last night on BT and was quizzed about this. He got us back up quite a bit, I think it's fair to say, Alan, about this. Didn't really like the questions about being referred to as using old school methods. What's your take on this whole story? Is it kind of an indicator that maybe he is a little bit too old school for the modern era, or has this story done Eddie Jones a bit of an injustice?
I'm not sure. I think I wasn't surprised when I read the piece on Friday myself, and a lot of people are kind of remaining anonymous who Owen Slott was speaking to, which was, if you're going to come out and say stuff like that, back it up. I'm sure maybe there were some former players and former staff members who probably don't want to kind of damage their reputations, and they're paranoid about what they were saying. But there's obviously some truth to it, because there has been a big turnover in staff. And it's the same in my experience with any coaches I ever worked with. If the team is winning, these things are never an issue. There's nobody talking about staff turnover, because if you're winning, I think that the comments would be that it's a masterstroke and that you've got to freshen things up and you're bringing in better people and they're bringing better quality to the whole project. But because England had a really poor Six Nations, and it's their joint worst Six Nations ever, finishing fifth. I think this stuff is probably surfacing a little bit. He certainly has a ruthless approach. I think one of the comments on the paper from somebody was, again, who remains anonymous, was that he's actually good company away from the rugby, but he's ruthless and unforgiving in the environment. I thought it was really interesting with John Mitchell trying to go and see his son play a cricket match on a day off during the summer test window, and he was getting ready to head out of the hotel, and Eddie Jones says, "Well, where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to see my son play cricket." "Well, it's a day off." And he said, "No, I've work for you to do." And there was a bit of a standoff there. John Mitchell went and watched the cricket match, and ultimately he's gone now. I think he walked himself. I was surprised with that, because usually when you pick, as a head coach, if you pick assistants particularly the rugby coaches, they're the ones you have to have a good connection with, and you have to really gel with, and they're the ones who you would hope have your back. So you kind of give them a bit of leeway and flexibility. And I just thought that one was surprising. I can understand how it happens with physios and medics and sports psychologists and stuff like that, because usually they're the ones who internally get criticised if certain players are not getting back. You're trying to get better people all the time. And so I was a bit surprised with that one. But look, I'm absolutely sure he's pretty ruthless in his approach. And, you know, if they won a World Cup in 2019, he would have been an unbelievable hero for them. He's had a fair bit of success. And but it's really interesting that this stuff has come out now. And particularly when he's left out some of the big name players that he's picked regularly, the Vunipolas and George Ford. But there's a balance between being ruthless on, in my opinion, and I had this chat with someone at the weekend, that if the environment is not enjoyable for the players and there is this tension and it's not a nice place to go. I think that one of the players even said that, a former player said that they'd meet the Irish, English and the Welsh lads, or the Irish, the Scots and the Welsh lads, and they'd hear stories about them having fun in camp, getting a day off, going back home at the week and in the middle of the week, stuff like that. And that stuff wasn't happening with England. But it'll be interesting to see how this, you know, because he's going in 2 years, I think, after the World Cup anyway, isn't he? But I wasn't surprised by it.
Yeah, it's a good point that you make, that it's between Eddie Jones and his coaches. Like, I mean, we've seen players all the time suffer a ruthless head coach across all different sports, and that's fair enough. That's kind of like a high performance setup, you'd suspect. And as you say, physios as well, there can sometimes be a tension there. But his actual coaches, the people he collaborates with essentially for the greater good of the squad, routinely leaving the camp. It must be just an unbelievably highly demanding environment to work in.
Yeah, and look, if you're winning, it's seen as a perfect environment because you're getting the results. And that's why it probably came up this time. And I remember in 2018 when Ireland went over to play the Grand Slam, I met a couple of former English players. And, you know, as you do, you say, well, how do you think the match will go today? Ireland were going for a Grand Slam in Twickenham. England are struggling that Six Nations, but, you know, obviously with Ireland coming to their home venue and what was at stake, I expected England to be really, really find some form that day. And I spoke to a couple of former English players, and one in particular said to me, I think Ireland will win this. Ireland will win the game. And I was surprised how, you know, convinced he was that England weren't going to be able to perform. And one of the reasons he said were, well, I was talking to one or two of the English guys this week, and Eddie has flogged them all week. They've done full contact sessions all week. The sessions have been really long. They're going to be worn out by the time the game comes. And I was kind of shocked by that, because I thought, you know, at that stage, one of the things you probably have to do, and this is, well, I'm no expert as a coach because I never did it, but I think if morale and players are struggling a little bit and results aren't going well, is to try and lift the mood. And one way of putting the mood down further is by flogging the players all week. So there's a balance. You have to kind of, at times, be really ruthless, and other times, I've always said this, the best coach I ever had at doing this stuff and the psychological stuff was Declan Kidney, having the ability to put his arm around people and, you know, other times kind of be hard on people. I think he was very good at that. He came from a background and of working with that stuff before and being able to do that himself. So he was very good at that. I've had coaches who've been unbelievable on the field, and so much detail and so much knowledge of the game, and maybe their approach to players wasn't that good. So it's somewhere in the middle that you need to understand your players and try and listen to them as well. And I you know, it's a bit unfair in Eddie Jones that I prefer people to come out and kind of say it straight up and identify themselves, and then he could challenge the people who said that. But there's been a big turnover of coaches. doctors, medics, sports psychologists, and he obviously sees that as an issue at times when England lose. Like I said at the start, he's always been pretty polite to me. I've criticised him once or twice when I've met him, but he seems like a nice fella. But when he goes into that environment or that internally, I think it wouldn't surprise me that he is very, very ruthless. Maybe he'll soften up a little bit in the next while now with his team and staff.
Is there any reason you haven't gone down the coaching route yet, actually?
Well, it just happened, Johnny. When I came out of the game, I wanted to take a little bit of break. I didn't want to. My plan was to go to the States, and I had a coaching gig set up there in a college over there. I was going to kind of dip my toes and do it a bit more kind of semi-pro scenario, not going straight in, professionally into a coaching setup. And then I got a call to go to the World Cup with ITV in 2011. Started writing for the Irish Times. Sky Sports asked me to do some matches, and between that kind of start of the season of September and the end of December, I had a load of requests to do games and do commentaries in games and do studio appearances. So I kind of changed tact a little bit and said I'll postpone the little bit of coaching. It wasn't for money that I was going doing it. I was going to travel a little bit. Maybe go to the UK, maybe go to France for a little bit for a year. And then suddenly before I knew it, I was pretty busy calling matches and broadcasting and stuff like that. And that's it. I haven't gone back since.
Is there a point then that you can't? Is there a point then that you can't, like? Do you lose kind of sight of what's going on in any aspect in terms of coaching? Can you just say, after 10 years, actually I'll give this a go now? Or are you, like, if Eddie Jones is considered a bit too old for it, like, do you get I guess removed from the modern developments or whatever?
It's a really good question, because people often we use this narrative at times that someone is out of the game too much, or they're too far away from the game, to that they're not hands-on. But what I would do over the years, I definitely speak to lots of coaches about their philosophies and what's changed, because if you're doing commentary on matches, you have to kind of be up to speed a little bit about the tactics, and obviously you have a knowledge of the way you view the game yourself, but kind of being up to speed in different training techniques and approaches from coaches and the way the game has evolved is really important to kind of stay in touch with that. I have done all my coaching badges. I do some underage coaching. I've helped out with clubs over the years, which is good for me as well as regards, seeing the approach and actually doing a bit of hands-on coaching where you're kind of trying to get your thoughts across to amateur people. It hasn't been with any professional teams. So we always hear this in the Premier League where ex-soccer players criticise someone and then there's a lot of stuff on social media about them being too far removed from the game. But I don't always agree with that. I think you look at some of the older pundits in soccer, there's a great balance in Sky between Souness and Neville and these guys and Roy Keane. So it's all about your own knowledge, but you have to keep up to speed a little bit. Would I ever go back coaching? I'd love to, in an ideal world, if you give me an opportunity to work with a team and do, lineouts and stuff like that. Would I be a head coach and deal with all that pressure and criticism? It's relentless. And there's a lot of my ex-teammates or coaches, and I see the kind of roller coaster effect it can have on them. There's obviously great rewards in it as well, but it's tough when results are not going well, and it's pressure all the time. So it's a tough job, and that's where Eddie Jones is. He's right at the top where people are having a pop off him when England. There's an expectation or pressure there for England to win every match, and if they don't, well then, maybe the environment gets looked at, and that's what he's going to have to deal with now.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the weekend's rugby, Alan. I'm not sure, was there any sort of expectation that the All Blacks wouldn't come up to the Northern Hemisphere on song, but that's certainly what's happened. Like, I mean, that Severies try on Saturday, I mean, they're here to play, Alan, and is it a little bit terrifying as an Ireland supporter looking at what they did to Wales?
Yeah, it is. Obviously, I think Wales are missing a lot of players, and I think it's difficult when you play against the All Blacks. If if you don't stop their flow and you don't match their physicality and really compete and kind of frustrate them and slow them down, they're relentless. And that's the way they've always been when they get on the front foot. And they were devastating at the weekend at times. I think they were fortunate with a couple of incidents and situations, the intercept tries. My son keeps asking me, who's the best rugby player in the world for the last number of years? And I keep saying Boden Barrett all the time. And he's just such a wonderful footballer. He's great anticipation of the way the game unfolds. And I think they were relentless and really ruthless in their approach. But Wales didn't help themselves at times. You know, when you give them a start like the intercept try right early on, it's just a bit of a hammer blow to Wales. But, you know, the pace and tempo that they play with is obviously very, very impressive. And you saw a spark from there at the weekend that would kind of frighten you. But without the ball as well. Defensively, they're so aggressive off the line and they just don't give the opposition a sniff. So for Ireland in particular, who we're obviously we're going to play them on Saturday week, you've got to get in amongst them and be really physical and bring an aggression to your game that matches that, and then hold on to the ball for periods of time and be tactically good. So it's hard to get all those things right when you're being put under so much pressure. So they play Italy now, and then they play Ireland and France. So they'll be looking for a clean sweep, and they have a lot of young, new players introduced in the squad, a fair core of experienced players as well, of course. But these guys just, bring that pace and that expectation that goes with wearing a New Zealand jersey with them, and they're going to be very difficult to stop. But who knows? We Ireland we don't know we're not really sure what kind of performance we're going to get, because we've no way of measuring that. I think Japan on Saturday is going to be obviously an important game to get a little bit of cohesion, but certainly New Zealand are a serious proposition, and they look to have their mojo back.
Before we let you go, Alan, we just wanted to touch on Ireland's second row. As we said, we're going to get you on again just to preview Japan properly later in the week. But just one of these things we've been doing with you is going through the positions. We had Keith Wood on last week, for example, doing the front row. Just on the second row this morning, Alan, we wanted to gauge the temperature from your perspective. So who are the starters there for you, and who are the people breathing down their necks?
Well, look, James Ryan is obviously the first one that comes to mind. I think the three, it's 2 into 3, isn't it? It's Ian Henderson, James Ryan, and Tadhg Beirne. You're going to be coming up against Retallick and Whitelock, who are probably, when they're on song, the best second rows in the world, certainly right up there. So I think, we've Henderson and James Ryan performed so well against them in previous years, in 2019, 18, before the World Cup, when we beat them in Dublin. Obviously we beat, the win in Chicago was a sensational win as well. So I think James Ryan, Ian Henderson, and either Tadhg Beirne, but I'd probably, Henderson hasn't played much rugby. He was only back last week. But I think James Ryan and Ian Henderson are probably the starters for me at this stage. It seems unfair that you have someone like Tadhg Beirne, who was, so good in South Africa and performed so well on the lines, that he wouldn't start. But I just think Henderson, he brings that ball carrying ability. I've said it a few times over the years, when he's physical and he's aggressive, he's so effective. So I'd probably start with them. And, when you look at the other second rows, you've got Ultan Dillane and Ryan Baird are the two backup second rows then. But I think Ryan and Henderson are probably the starters for me.
Ryan and Henderson. And does that make Beirne a live option in the back row, or are you separating him entirely from that?
Yeah, it's tricky and it's a good situation. I'd love to have a big bruiser that you could throw in the second row. But, look, there's going to be a pace to that game against New Zealand that Ireland can cope with. So I think Henderson and James Ryan are great footballers as well. Tadhg Beirne is of course, he's a live option and may start in the second row. The back row for me, Doris and Conan probably at this stage are two starters, so it's a case of who's going to play number 7, which would have a situation with Tadhg coming off the bench, which is not a bad situation for you.
For sure. So then between Delan and Baird, who would you have as the first man coming off the bench?
Bloody hell on, you want these bank details at the moment where you're on.
Well, if Tadhg was on the bench, I think then you're going for another back row.
Yeah.
Who goes on the bench, so you wouldn't be taking 2 second rows. Maybe you would. I think Ryan Baird and Tadhg can obviously play in the back row. I think you have to have Peter Mahoney somewhere in there with his experience over the years. If he doesn't start, he's going to be coming off the bench, maybe with Byrne.
All the tough questions at 9 on a Monday morning.
I mean, Johnny, you were digging into his coaching history and his career trajectory, and you know what? I enjoyed every minute of it. So thanks for asking the tough questions, Johnny. Alan, thanks for being with us as ever on a Monday morning.
Cheers, lads. Thanks.
Alan Quinlan, their host of the Red 78 podcast, OTB Sports' new Munster-specific podcast as well.
Everyone is doing a podcast now. Like, you think we started League of Ireland one, and it was like, oh, this is great, there aren't many podcasts. Now there are about 50 or something. It's just the media of our time. Just a reminder that the winner of our performance rankings will be announced on our social media channels a little bit later on, so thanks a million for all your suggestions on that. OTB AM has been brought to you by Gillette. Good morning start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. Johnny, a pleasure. Thanks a million for coming in. Thanks, Owen. It's good to see you again. Join us tomorrow morning from 7:30. We're going to be talking Formula 1, Champions League and much more besides. Right now we're bringing you more reaction to the weekend sport. Here is Tommy Martin and Gavin Casey on the Sunday Paper Review.
Winners yesterday in London. Sunday World, Christ saves Ole from sack, and we also have a fright in the Bright. That's Brighton giving Liverpool a fright at Anfield, 2-2 draw there. Sunday Mirror, Ronnie Volley saves Ole. Wonder goal takes pressure off Boss. Picture of Ronaldo sliding on his knees after that extraordinary goal. Yesterday evening we have the Observer. Again, it's Ronaldo, all for Ole. Ronaldo leads the way in resounding 3-0 defeat of Spurs. The Mail on Sunday, similarly, it's Golden Oldies as their angle. With a combined age of 70, United veterans Cavani and Ronaldo ride to Ole's rescue. And then Sunday Times, Hitman, it's Ronaldo wheeling away in celebration. All business there. Ronaldo stars as Man United beat Spurs 3-0. And I think picture of the bunch on the front pages, it's ball on Ronaldo's laces as he volleys that strike towards the bottom corner. It was an amazing strike. Ronaldo to the rescue is the headline. Spurs suffer United backlash as furious fans crack up the heat on Nuno. They are your back pages. Very happy to say Gavin Casey of the 42 is in studio. Hello.
How are you, Joe?
And Tommy Martin. Busy week ahead on Virgin Media, Champions League week ahead. You're very welcome, Tommy. It's all about Ole this week.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Gavin. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny though how you think you have the narrative sorted, and you're watching the game, and Sky have Roy Keane back on in the first team lineup after a bit like Cavani, drafting in the big guns after missing the previous week, and obviously before the match it was all guns blazing, and then the match itself. It's really interesting that, like, as much as it was a good night for United, the formation change worked. The back three, Varane had a great game. The back three looked solid. The wing backs caused Tottenham lots of problems, and then Ronaldo, he's always going to make a fool out of you when you question whether he's signing him was a disaster or whatever. And getting Cavani back, I mean, he just has so much. He's so clever. His movement, his experience, his class. And to be fair to Solskjaer, I checked back, he's actually only been available for 5 of the 10 league matches, and he started 2 of them, so it's not like he's been totally in the cold, but it did just look so much better with him in the team. Having said that, any United fans thinking that last night was cause for celebration of a potential return to greatness, the opposition in Spurs were so poor, and it was just funny the tone after the game. It comes to studio, and it's a bit like, because the story became Spurs. I know we're so focused on Man United here, and they're the bigger story. They have more fans. All the back pages are all pictures of Ronaldo because that was the big moment. But I mean the hostility and the negativity in that Tottenham stadium towards the manager, towards the board, towards Harry Kane. I mean, that became the story then. And you had, and Jermaine Defoe was in the Sky studio as the token Spurs guy. And it was a bit like, okay, this hasn't worked out the way we planned. and obviously Roy and Souness, went to town on them. So the coverage today is kind of, okay, we've had to take a little sidestep and adjust to this. The bigger picture from United's point of view is that was a great result for United last night. That was a terrible result for United last night. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is not a bad manager. He is absolutely not a terrible manager, but he is not good enough for Manchester United. Never has been, never will be. More experienced, more knowledgeable football minds than me have expressed his opinion. It's glaringly obvious, and yet he's never quite done enough to get sacked so that they can actually get somebody in who is good enough for Manchester United. And last night is just another case in point. Good performance, made some changes. They have enough class to win enough games that he won't get sacked, and the thing just rumbles on. So that's my sense of it. A good result and a bad result.
Yeah, Gav?
I think the funny thing about the Solskjaer situation is that Ed Woodward and the Man United hierarchy are actually rooting for him because they don't want to make that change. I mean, they don't want the hassle of it. They also don't want the hassle of potentially having to deal with somebody like Antonio Conte, who's going to say no to things every now and then, who isn't going to placate them and isn't necessarily going to toe the party line. I find it fascinating reading work from journalists throughout the week. Actually, Miguel Delaney in the London Independent earlier in the week had a piece saying that one of the reasons why United didn't remove Solskjaer immediately after the Liverpool game is because they had absolutely no succession plan in place. And it's not a change that they had anticipated making at all this season. I find that absolutely astonishing when you consider the couple of seasons that preceded.
Jonathan Northcroft makes that point on page 8 and 9 of the Sunday Times. He says, the win over woeful Spurs can't hide the fact United need to stop being so reactive and start acting like Fergie. And when he says acting like Fergie, he means succession planning, and, uses one of the many gazillion stories you can use about Alex Ferguson, where I think Northcroft worked on Peter Schmeichel's autobiography, but he remembers walking around with Alex Ferguson at Carrington long after he'd retired, and Ferguson was, looking at the first team, the reserves, the under-18s, and Ferguson pointed to a kid and said, see him, not next season, the season after, he'll play half of our first League Cup game, Ferguson said. Sure enough, 18 months later, the youngster did. And so the point is, Ferguson planned for the future. Manchester United are not planning for the future. And Northcroft backs up that Miguel Delaney point, which is that United really have done no planning on who might succeed Solskjaer should the season go awry. And now the season's going awry, and they're like, oh, how do we feel about all this?
And it's predictably going awry as well. I find it, I understand to a degree how United fans can get defensive over the signing of Ronaldo, and when they hear supposed boffins and football experts describing how it's a disruptive signing. Actually it's a bad thing, that it might drive them nuts. But the reality is that Solskjaer has had to change his entire system. I mean, if he had a future plan in place, that's been ripped to shreds purely based on United's obsession with their own past, based on their desire to be this never-ending, relentless content machine. I mean, their Twitter account turned into just a Ronaldo fan account for about 2-3 weeks after his signing, right? And it is all about numbers. We know famously it's emerged plenty of times when Ed Woodward has met shareholders, for example, how popular the club app is and their social media numbers, all these sorts of things. Like the Ferguson thing is interesting in the sense that, again, it's that indulging in one's own past that United are sort of guilty of in handing him a spare key even. Like, I'm not saying he's driving the entire machine or the entire vehicle, but the fact that he's still so influential, I can, again, like on paper, could it be argued that it makes sense? Like, he's an absolute club legend, he knows more about football, or he's forgotten more about football than any of us will ever know. He also hasn't been a manager in 8 years, Joe. And like, the sport has moved on significantly since then, as we've seen both on the field and off the field. And it's unfair now to describe Ferguson as some kind of a relic. He's more than that. But the fact that he has such a hands-on role with the club at the moment, again, bewilders me. Like,
I think the Jonathan Northcroft's piece, which is one of the few actual sort of analytical pieces in the papers, I guess maybe last night's kick-off time, and maybe there was a sense that it's hard to react. This was obviously written before the Tottenham game, and there's a hastily written headline. Win over woeful Spurs can't hide the fact that United need to stop being so reactive and start acting like Fergie. The Fergie, acting like Fergie, is related. I think he's referring to some. So he says some critics have picked United's problems apart. An argument has emerged that the club need to have less Fergie in the thinking. That was a reference, I think, to Jonathan Liu in The Guardian. I wrote a piece about this ridiculous adherence, as Gavin touches on there, adherence to what he called Fergieism. And as you said, Joe, Northcross piece is to take the things from Ferguson's time, which were he was all about forward planning, all about making that thinking ahead of the opposition, not being reactive. Reactive is the word that is used again and again in this piece. United are totally reactive. They've done some renovations to the stadium only when it was like becoming the places started falling apart. The Ronaldo transfer, reactive. The thing about not having a succession plan, reactive. Like if they do have to sack Solskjaer, they'll just do what they always do, look around and get the most expensive, closest option that they can possibly reach for. But the whole thing of the Fergieism is that, and Jonathan Liu's piece is that it's all about these kind of sort of tropes of Fergieism, winger, or like vague sort of things about wingers and last minute winners and, passion and flying football and sort of, bringing back old faces like Ole and like Ronaldo and this sort of, all this has been said so many times before, but the fact that Old Trafford to become a theme park for that sort of, United sort of nostalgia. And it's hard not to think, especially after last Sunday, and you can't let last night, as I said, Spurs were so bad. Like that's a whole other story. They are so bad. You can't let it colour the fact. Manchester United have become a bit of a joke. Like they have become a joke football club because of the way it's been run. They have thrown enough money at it to stay reasonably competitive, but all the things that all the best in class teams do, United just haven't been doing them. And you get situations like last Sunday, which was so embarrassing from a United point of view, and everything about it, Fergie hanging around, Ole, and he doesn't cut the figure of a Manchester United manager. He doesn't cut the figure of a top class manager. He's a Preston North End manager. He's a decent, managing a team competing in the Championship, maybe getting into the Premier League. He's not at all saying he's not cut out to be a football manager, but he's just not cut out to be professionally cut out to be a Manchester United manager. All those aspects, and Northcross piece is sort of, goes on then, and you can talk about, his last paragraph then is saying like, okay, what do they need to do to get the right sort of Fergieism in, that it is not reactive and it is forward planning. A developer of youth products, a builder, a person who gets traditions, a holistic leader, someone who can coach detailed, dynamic, collective football in the modern way. That sounds more like Brendan Rodgers. So that's another argument, like who might that man be? But so I mean, definitely against a limp Spurs victory last night doesn't change a lot, I don't think.
I suspect all of us sat up a bit straighter when we saw Roy Keane was in studio last night, because that's just the reality of consuming football on television now. And so Paul McGrath straight in the Sunday World. Roy Keane absolutely right to put the boot into United, is McGrath's take. And then David Walsh, back page of the Sunday Times, mute the cheerleading pundits, spare me their delirious dancing, let's hear more cantankerous talk from Scholes and Keane. At least then we may actually learn the truth. So, for instance, he's not a fan of the likes of Ian Wright dancing in the studio when Harry Kane scores the winner for England in the Euros. He wants the cantankerous type pundits, but he does say that the disappointment last week he felt when the likes of Fabinho and Thiago were injured was nothing compared with the sense of deprivation that came with the realisation that Roy Keane wasn't in the Sky lineup. And he goes on to talk about the pundits who work best can be occasionally cantankerous. Graham Souness, Keane, Paul Scholes, they may not always be right, but they're prepared to challenge the consensus view. And he says of Souness, you'll often disagree with his assessment of a player or an incident. Over time, though, you realise he's seldom wrong. And he says, the loser when pundits are presented as fans is that we can no longer trust their judgment. If they so desperately want their team to win, then can they make unbiased calls? So, look, he doesn't want the cheerleaders. He wants the cantankerous types in the studio. And Gav, I suspect when he saw no Roy Keane in the Sky Sports studio last week, he wasn't alone in thinking, we're missing a vital player here.
Yeah, I think Keane yesterday, what was it, but just before kickoff in the Spurs game, when he went on one of those obviously trademark seething rants, the impression
although with enough control to do a Harry Maguire impersonation.
Well, I was just going to say, I was wondering where he was going to go with it. I have to admit, right, I find Roy Keane very entertaining still, and I find it astonishing that so many sports journalists have the confidence to say Roy Keane is boring. I mean, nobody wants to hear sports journalists talk about why they don't find Roy Keane interesting. Like, just go with. I mean, if you don't find him interesting, fair enough, but I would suggest he's still pretty compelling. He obviously doesn't have a great deal of insight to offer in terms of like tactical analysis or whatever. We know all of this, but when he goes off on one like that, or when you kind of hear the gears turning and the ignition starting, you're kind of wondering, all right, where will this end? The Maguire impression probably bumps it up to one of his all-time great outbursts, but behind it there were salient points. And like, I mean, I agree with McGrath. He is right to call out the players, because realistically, like, first and foremost, if you are a pundit, it's your job to do that. Forget about like his connection to the club. I know David Walsh makes the point in his piece that Keane can be dispassionate about the club while still being passionate about team performance. I mean, I actually think that in and of itself is a bit of a performance. He said in the intervening years since he left United that he'd sort of, he no longer followed them or supported them, so to speak, and that they were always more so his employers, but he still goes to United games, and I think it's very evident he still cares about what's going on at the club, right? What I find, I suppose, interesting about him not being there a week prior then is you have, say, like, what I find Gary Neville is a little bit of an outlier in what both McGrath and Walsh are speaking about, I suppose, in the sense that he's always willing to call out team performance, and even the club won't call out the manager, and has made a big song and dance about the fact he'd never called for any manager to be sacked, which is fair enough. But I do think it's interesting that he was so upfront about the fact that, I think it was on Monday Night Football a couple of weeks ago, he was making the case for himself not calling out Solskjaer on the basis that he is my friend, actually. I actually like him, he's a nice guy. And on the one hand, you kind of think, yeah, actually, like, zoom out here for a second, right? If you were in that situation, and if it was your friend, what's more important to you? Doing your job, so to speak, to borrow Roy Keane's phrase, or actually not alienating somebody who you actually care about? You know what I mean? On a human level, what's more important? The argument then is, like, should he be on those games, or like in that situation, as it is at the moment where Solskjaer's job is on the line, should Neville actually be covering United games? Like, it's interesting, he was on co-commentary yesterday for the Spurs game, you know? And I'm wondering even, I mean, maybe it's a bit of a tangential or a separate conversation, but like, the role of a pundit or a co-commentator in that situation, if you're a Spurs fan and you're paying for Sky Sports and you're watching that game, like Neville is obviously very United-centric, United-focused. Everything yesterday was about United until, as Tommy mentioned earlier, it wasn't. When the Spurs fans turned, it kind of became a Spurs story, but I don't know. Like, the entire thing of the fact that pundits now are invariably all partisan in some way, it would suggest like market forces are moving in that direction. That's what people want to see. Three of us sitting here and plenty of people at home probably would like to see more dispassion or people removed from it and speaking about it more analytically a little bit.
What do you make of it all, Tommy?
I think, well, look, on the, I mean, look, David Walsh is absolutely right. You know, you need the guys who call it as they see it, and if a pundit is a fan and is not unbiased and is partial, you know, the viewer is going to suffer. Just a slight tangent, you know, he talks about some of the things around the England coverage from the various channels during the summer. Those big international ones can be hard ones for broadcasters to get the tone up, because they can be moments of national celebration, and sometimes you have to be seen to get the national mood. But again, you know, it goes too far, particularly in England. Like, I always think of Italia 90, and you know, it comes back to studio, and Bill O'Hurley has the novelty the novelty hat on, and saying, you know, ole ole, we're off to Rome. And, you know, the two lads, Dunphy and Giles, are kind of laughing at him, and there's a little bit of that. But they kind of got the balance right. I think the English broadcasters just go too far, and they kind of lose the plot, and the dancing stuff is too much. But I can kind of understand that can be hard to get the tone of. In terms of the United thing, and this comes back to what Scholes said about Keane, United have been so badly served by the platoon of ex-United players, ex-Solskjaer mates in the media. If you have, it's like the housing crisis, or it's like the economic crash here. that the accusation that the papers and the media didn't call the situation out because they were getting too much money from property supplements. If you are in some way, if the media is in some way not able to call it correctly and truly and without fear or favour, ultimately it's a bad thing in the long run, because you will let things go on that need to be called out way sooner because it suits you, it suits your partiality, that it is so. It suits Gary Neville and indeed Roy Keane, and indeed up until now Scholes, for Ollie to do well, because he's their mate and they don't have to go and do, as Gavin says, not an easy thing to go and say, look, I'm sorry, this is not the right thing for this is not the right man for the job, this is not the right way things are being doing. So everybody saying fair play to Scholes, who come out last week and criticised the performance. Bit late, pal. Bit late. I mean, listen. I'm not blowing smoke up our own arses, but look at someone like Damien Delaney. We were covering Europa League, Manchester United last year on Version, and he was making all these points, detailed analysis, clips. Basically, his line was, United are tolerating mediocrity here, and that was the point I sort of touched on when I say Ollie is a perfectly good championship manager. And these guys, all these pundits have come and they have facilitated that. And to come back to Gavin's point, it's only football. It's not that serious, so let's not get too pompous about it. But in reality, Gary Neville should recuse himself on all discussion of Man United and their manager and their tactics and how they're approached. If he's to declare that he's my mate, that is colouring my view, he should recuse himself. But look, it's only football. Let's have him there, and we can laugh at him and take the mick out of it if we want. But in reality, that's where it is.
I sort of feel, in defence of Neville, he's got a lot of criticism in the past week, and I understand it because it was a difficult line to hold after the Liverpool 5-0 on the managerial situation. To be fair to him, he's non-discriminatory in his position of never calling for any manager to be sacked regardless of the club, and he's never done that. So we're not talking about somebody who's called for several managers in the past to be sacked and is now making an exception for Solskjaer. That is just a policy of his. And actually, I think all the pundits are following suit now. It seems to be a general softening of society that we don't just call for managers to be sacked the way it was commonplace 10 years ago.
He sat across from Jamie Carragher that same night, or in one of the around the same time, and Carragher made that point that this is not a manager that City would have, that Liverpool would have, that Chelsea would have. End of discussion. And that's not a drive a man out of his job, hound a man out of his job point.
It's funny, Tommy, like you mentioned that, and like what you were saying there, Joe, about how most pundits are following suit, because Carragher even climbed down a little bit from that in saying oh, well, they're not going to replace him now, but at the end of the season. And you're like, okay, so there's a little caveat there. You need to assess the situation at the end of the season. You don't need to sack your manager now.
He did also say, I will never call for a manager to be sacked either, but he's not good enough.
Man United will never win a Premier League title or a Champions League with him at the helm.
This is the last time I'll use this expression, to be fair to Neville. He has said Solskjaer needs to win a trophy.
Yeah.
So there is a degree of...
Yeah, but I mean, to go back to Carragher's point, we're probably rehashing an entire episode of Monday Night Football here, but Carragher in that same conversation was saying, you win a Europa League or an FA Cup, is that enough? And I would say in the third year of this experiment in nostalgia, even two of them wouldn't be enough.
Sure, no, I accept that. Yeah, I mean, it does just go. So we talked more about all that business than the game.
But the game was meaningless. The game was meaningless.
I mean, look. My son, God love him, lifetime of pain, has decided to be a Tottenham fan, and so I kind of watch their games with a little bit of interest in the sense of how they're doing. And they have been, for 3 years now, they have been lifeless, wooden. They've been like the dance floor at a chartered accountant's Christmas party in the way they've come to play football. Just completely, there's been no, from a team under Pochettino in the early time, which are full of energy and attitude and really went at you, and they've been so, and it's just reached this absolute apotheosis last night. They were so flat, and I think that the fans sitting in this palatial stadium watching this dreck, and the thing that got it for me is I was watching them coming out for one of the recent games, being led out by Harry Kane, and it's not all about being captain. It's not like Paul O'Connell stuff, but you're still being led out to battle by a guy who doesn't want to be there. I mean, Jesus, they are,
Kane was absolutely pathetic, and it was probably the most conspicuous I've ever seen a player not try. I mean, it was on a professional level, you'd kind of think, even just having a bit of professional pride, it wasn't a case of downing tools. Like, he didn't even bring the tools. I was surprised to see him wearing boots, But just going back to the sort of.
You two have had extra shots of coffee this morning, haven't you? Holy. Knives are out.
Are you talking about the first goal, Gavin, where the ball comes out and Maguire goes to make it, and Kane is there, he's in picture, and he's like, a PlayStation where there's a character that's like a random, he's not being controlled, he's just sort of wandering around. He wasn't acting with agency or free will, he was just sort of,
he was just a kind of a vacant, even when the fans turn on Kane. So a couple of times he gives the ball away, and you can actually hear the poison coming from the stands at this point. And he doesn't even break into a jog.
Yeah.
He's done, or at least he was done for the day yesterday, quite early on. But just on we've obviously spoken about United a lot and their managerial situation. But for Nuno Espirito Santo, I would suggest that to state, as Carragher did about Solskjaer, he's not good enough for this club. He's not good enough to retain the job beyond the end of the season or whenever. I think that's fair game. What are we doing? Why are we tiptoeing around this? It's not some sort of sacred position.
Yeah.
But equally, or on the flip side, I felt very sorry for Nuno Espirito Santo.
He seems like a lovely man and a very intelligent man. And I thought on the back of his job at Wolves, especially that initial season, he looked like he was a manager of real calibre.
But he was about their 8th choice. And the fans knew that. It wasn't even a secret. And I reckon they kind of realise now, obviously, it's probably not going to... his style of football isn't going to work for them. The players don't look like they're going to really work for him. And I found it... I thought it was the most sort of stirring or stunning example of fans turning on their own manager in a game. I know there have been situations in the past where somebody's flung a season ticket at, I don't know, Steve McLaren or somebody like that. But
the whole stadium booing the substitution of Mora was an amazing moment.
That was incredible.
Wow.
When a couple of times the fans would start chanting, and I was trying to listen in over the commentary to hear what, are they singing we want Nuno out or something like that? I think they were at one point. At one point they were singing you don't know what you're doing to the referee, but I think they also started singing that towards Nuno after the Mora substitution, and then the camera pans to him and he looks he looks almost, it's not even fair to say beleaguered or whatever the usual term is for manager. He looked actually genuinely sad, And it's funny, I know people were joking about the game being El Sacico or whatever, but all of the focus going into the game was on, can Solskjaer save his job? And in reality, as it transpired, it's probably the game in which Nuno Espirito Santo lost his.
It feels that way.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, proud supporters of Movember. Gentlemen, let's move.